Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Tobirama trains Naruto for Chunin exams part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Madara gazed dully into the lifeless eyes of his reflection, his face completely devoid of any expression. The only outward sign that could cue someone of his emotional distress was the way his fingers' brutal grip tightened dangerously on the sink's edge, the ominous cracking audibly growing in volume. He forcefully maneuvered his stiff joints into releasing their grip in favor of forming the tiger hand seal. Release. His iris, the morbid color of blood with 3 black commas, distractedly traced his reflection's soft cherubic cheeks and lack of wrinkles on his skin. It was the face of an innocent 5-year-old with eyes far too old, too worn, too jaded. His pasty complexion didn't help, making him look sickly, ill, and on the verge of death. Release. They soon morphed and swirled into the familiar and unique pattern of his eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, his sclera being the color of fresh snow, more disturbing than the actual fact that a child of 5 winters has awakened the evolved form of his clan's famed Dojutsu. Madara could feel his feeble chakra reserves plummet to dangerous levels, this body too young to actually activate the Sharingan, much less the Mangekyou. However, he has always been a stubborn man, but always in the wrong and fallacious sense. Release. We're both going to die. Right now, we can drink together. As war buddies. War buddies, huh? I guess that's fine. Bye. Release. The pudgy fist full of frustration, denial and anger, sorrow, went flying, breaking the mirror and tearing his skin in the process. A hiccough slipped past his lips as involuntary tears rolled down his face. The pain originated more from his sternum than his fist, and Madara could not help but grasp his chest, cloth bunching up as he held them in a white-knuckle grip. Our release really. He dropped to his knees as his chakra flickered incongruously until only a small flame remained, just enough to survive, yet not anywhere near enough to do anything else. His body had forcefully cut off his roots of supply as an act of self-preservation, too deeply engraved in his soul to voluntarily control the fight. His airway spasmed in his uncontrollable rage at being denied a peaceful demise, and despite the air still trapped inside his lungs, he continued to inhale, as if he has lost all abilities to properly exhale. His forehead planted itself onto the ground with undignified stiffness as he continued to gasp for air, beads of cold sweat rolling down his nape and saliva dribbling down his chin. Clawing uselessly at his chest, Madara fell sideways, his eyes jerking desperately all over the place in search for some kind of respite. He gave up a few seconds after, feeling that it was pointless. The dead should remain as such and the world, he thought bitterly, would be much safer without him. Mind made up, his body went limp and his jaws locked tightly in place. He closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable, apathetic to how his lungs burned with the need to circulate oxygenated air into his system. Madara slipped away, welcoming the darkness with a small yet blissful smile playing on his lips. Maybe now he could have that drink with Hashirama. He woke up to his long-dead clan's medics fretting over him. Time travel. Dimensional travel. Alternate universes. Those words kept repeating like a broken tape recorder in his head, theories upon theories forming within the speed of light, yet easily discarded not a second later. Denial and Madara often went hand in hand, their perpetual bond developed from an early age until he was all but married to that foul mistress. He wished that it was Hashirama who had been granted this second chance and not him. His war buddy, his best friend, his comrade, deserved it more than Madara, who was in still a broken and delusional man who failed spectacularly throughout his entire life. But so many useless and pointless thoughts circling in his head, Madara cut himself off by hugging Izuna, a toddler no older than 3 winters, tighter to his chest, rocking and humming the child to sleep. Madara knew he was a failure of an older brother, but this time, despite the lack of will to live, his body was constantly tired, his soul far too old to accommodate. He would do his best to protect his younger brothers. If he needed to remove Tajima early in order to take his rightful place as clan head, just to shield his brothers from entering the battlefield too early, he would do so in a heartbeat. With intimate knowledge of the future in his hands, he knew how exactly to bring an end to the feud with the Senju, to bring forth an era of peace. This time, however, it would not be at the cost of Izuna's life or eyes. Madara swore that he would see all of his little brothers grow old or as old as Madara could live with his borderline suicidal mentality. He would be the first of his family to perish, never them. Not again. But before his demise, he would rid the world of that abnormality. Never again will Dakizetsu, that parasitic bastard, tempt and manipulate another human to do its bidding. At this point in time, that literal backstabber would be easier to seal away as it did not have Hashirama's cells to disappear swiftly via mayfly. Carefully tucking the sleeping toddler until his brother was warm and comfortable underneath the blankets, he turned his head slightly to stare out the window. He knew it was all in his head, but his eyes refused to see the moon as any other color than blood red. Idly, Madara wondered if he was ill in the head. Or if there was something wrong with his optic nerves. What if everything was but an illusion? His eyes darted to the sleeping Izuna, compulsively burning into his brain the sight of those soft features and pure innocence exuding from his baby brother. With hesitant fingers, bloodied hands that only brought forth unimaginable terror and misery to others, he stroked Izuna's cheeks and eyes before leaning to kiss his brother's forehead, his lips lingering as he breathes in Izuna's nostalgic and poignant scent. If this was an illusion, he wouldn't mind being trapped inside for all eternity. Ultimately, reality consisted only of pain and suffering, a futility to someone as old as him. Madara accepted the mission scroll Tajima gave him, skimming over the contents until he nodded his understanding. Tajima may be a shite excuse for a father, but he was a splendid shinobi with a discerning eye, knowing exactly what sort of missions Madara could excel with his physical age in consideration. Unlike his first childhood, Madara was by far too skilled to be kept out of missions and battles, despite only being physically 5 years old. Furthermore, with how somber and ruthless he was, taking lives left to right without an ounce of hesitation, his first kill had been swift and unsympathetic. He knew his clansmen whispered about him being a disturbing child. It stung, but he has always been good at compartmentalization. If he could not inspire love, he would cause fear. He coped by ignoring every judgmental whispers until it all became background noises, their words unintelligible to his ears. Even now, he doubted that his parents noticed his selective mutism and withdrawn behavior. His father's only concern was to build him into a perfect war general/leader in their battles against the other clans, whilst his mother diligently continued to reproduce replacements if Madara were to ever be Kia. Frankly, he had forgotten how people felt about gender in this time period. Especially for those who were born into a clan that prides in bloodline limits. There were no women in their army, for fear of others capturing them and using them to breed. To the people born and bred in this era laden by countless clan wars, women were little more than childbirthing machines unless they were insanely strong. Children were little more than cannon fodder or a purpose to strengthen their numbers. Clanless ninjas roaming the place with no other than reason than to kill for food on their table. Madara loathed the warring states period. It was nothing but aimless pandemonium, and as a man who had once fought against the entire shinobi world, he only did so with a purpose in mind, for peace, as misguided as it was. Madara tucked the mission scroll into his drawstring pouch and waited silently until the man dismissed him, looking directly into his father's dark, narrowed eyes and having no fear of the man's Sharingan prowess. Jinjutsu was an ability gained from one's superior will, unbending mind, and precise chakra control. His physical body played no factor as he could easily counter any man-made illusions thrown his way. The only issue he has was with his stamina and small reserves. Although he was trusted to complete missions that only children twice his physical age were given, proving to Tajima that he was a prodigy, the man looked as if he was contemplating something. Tajima ended up saying nothing after 5 minutes ticked by. As soon as he was sent out of the man's study, he grabbed his oversized, to a child, mission bag, kissed Izuna on the forehead, and left the compound immediately. After gaining a fair distance, he set his bag down and retrieved a senbon and a pigmented ink pot. Having sterilized his senbon with a small fire jutsu, Madara, with meticulous care, inked a seal white in color on his right tricep. It took him many months to smuggle the materials to handmake his own ink, but it was worth it. In this period, only the Uzumaki were masters in Fuinjutsu, and even then, tattooed seals were never thought of before Tobirama came about creating the Anbu tattoo. Jinchuriki seals were a different branch altogether, and Mito was the one who invented it and became the first ever Jinchuriki, technically, since nobody knew Satsuki Hagoromo was the Juubi's Jinchuriki. Hence, if he were to unluckily enough to be caught, no one would suspect a child from the Uchiha clan to know anything about seals, much less use it in such a risky way. Seals tattooed on the skin, if inked incorrectly or made by someone without a mastery in the art, as the people decades later had come to learn after trying to imitate Tobirama's Anbu tattoo design blindly without understanding its concept, could result in a painful death as their chakra would rebel, similar to how white blood cells fight an infection. Madara had been so bored, his elderly life spent in a dark cave, siphoning chakra from the Jito statue, with no company other than the white Zetsu clones. He had ordered them to sneakily bring him Fuinjutsu scrolls from the Uzumaki over the decades he was alive, so that he would be able to understand the sealing arts better. As for why he mastered them, he was a perfectionist, always will be. When Uzushi Agakure fell, he had Zetsu salvage what they could, before moving on to other hobbies when he had read all that he could read. After he was done, making sure that the items stored inside could only be released once specific conditions were met, he sealed his mission bag, leaving only his makeshift shuriken holster strapped around his left thigh and an adult-sized sheathed katana slung across his back. All in all, he looked like a child who stole their father's weapon and ran away from home. Not that Madara cared. If others underestimated him, it was their own funeral. Adding down his navy blue mantle sans Ichiwa fan on the back, he continued on his journey and entered Senju territory. His mission wasn't in any way related to the Senju. However, he would be able to complete it quicker if he cut through their territory to reach his destination. Madara loathes having Izuna out of his sight for prolonged periods of time. And with Ryota due to be born soon, Madara desires to not miss his second younger brother's birth. With the help of his chakra sensing abilities, although his range was in no way comparable to Tobirama's, he artfully avoided the Senju patrols for the whole day and camped high in the trees, hiding inside hollow trunks during the night to avoid detection. It took Madara a total of 2 weeks to reach the small fishing hamlet belonging to the Hagoromo clan, what with his pitiful stamina and short limbs. His mission was to blend in and investigate if the Hagoromo clan were worthy enough to be allied with. Madara already knew that their clans had once been allies against the Senju back in his first life, but if possible, he would rather they not ally themselves with such scum. He recalled thanks to his perfect memory that clan made a sport of hunting children from opposition clans. My little brother was killed. Madara, right. Have you any younger siblings? To nip the bud before they could grow. It was distasteful to Madara, who had once upon a time dreamed of building a sanctuary for his younger brothers, for children to grow naturally, rather than be forced to mature and die prematurely. And yes, he knew he was being hypocritical. He had manipulated many children in his old age, and Obito was his biggest mistake as of yet. Madara knew that if he ever lived long enough to meet Obito once more, he would train the boy properly this time. Not as a stooge, but as a direct disciple. He owed the other Uchiha for all he has done to the young lad. How unforgiving he had been to tear all that young Obito loved and made him grow into such a twisted man. Obito, that endearing brat, had made the loneliness he accumulated throughout the decades dissipate, gradually, ever so slightly, but he had been too stubborn in his quest for peace to cherish those moments. He had been such an old fool, too obtuse to realize that he had already adopted Obito into his family and yet, still used the younger Uchiha like a disposable tool. He regrets. Oh, how he regrets and feels such shame. Madara couldn't help but stare at his pudgy hands, currently free of blood but heavy with stolen lives and burden. Despite this body's young age, his body count was plenty, enough to put even some adults to shame. He truly was someone who brings nothing but pain and misery onto others. He physically shook himself out of his self-hatred and changed his clothing to blend in better with the homeless orphans and street rats. The mission lasted a total of 3 months if he counted his travel time. Whilst his father stoically read Madara's mission report back in the clan head's office, he sat outside his birthing mother's bedchamber with Izuna tucked under his chin, the two brothers eager to meet the latest addition to their family. What he didn't write in the report was that in the process of observing the Hagoromo clan, Madara had accidentally pushed and prodded a few holes in their meager defenses, which then allowed their enemies to spit on them whilst they were down. Oops. Well, they have nobody to blame but themselves. Thus, proving that they were not worthy to ally themselves with the Uchiha. Despite having no urge to retry his Eye of the Moon plan, Madara has always been a master puppeteer, stringing those along without their knowledge and making others dance to his tune. He worked best in the shadows than the light, after all. Aniki. At Izuna's childish call, Madara looked up from bottle-feeding Ryota, his eyes instantaneously zooming to the running toddler. He shifted his hold on the infant for better security and bodily turned from Izuna just as the latter crashed into his side. Thankfully, he was well prepared and had glued his feet to the ground with chakra, knowing how energetic Izuna's usual greetings were. Careful, he whispered, voice cracking slightly from how seldom he uses his voice box nowadays. Sorry, Aniki, Ryota-chan. Izuna smiled sheepishly, the 4 missing front teeth and tangled hair making him twice as adorable. Madara shook his head slightly with a small smile, showing his little brother that all was good. Without conscious thought, he balanced the bottle and baby with one arm, whilst his free hand started to groom Izuna's hair, plucking out leaves and twigs, whilst detangling the strands with his fingers. He hummed slightly in question when Izuna continued to fidget in place, his eyes looking at Madara with blatant adoration. He returned the look with his own besotted one. In this life, Madara felt more like Izuna and Ryota's parent rather than eldest brother, due to the difference in age, and with how their biological parents acted, parental affection was something Madara has never experienced. Still, he tries his hardest for Izuna and Ryota, not wanting them to feel neglected. Can Aniki teach me how throw shuriken now? His little brother peered from his lashes, lower lips jutting out in an adorable pout. Madara chuckled endearingly at the butchered pronunciation and a rather obvious attempt at manipulation. Regardless, he nodded his consent and guided Izuna to the wooden targets at their backyard, but not before correcting his word and sentence structure. Although a commendable effort for a 3-going 4-year-old, their father was not a patient man and would punish them if they did something wrong. Even if that something was as inane as grammar mistakes. As he went about correcting Izuna's form, he didn't neglect the babe in his arm. Gently burping Ryota after the infant was done with his milk, Madara set aside the bottle and rocked his baby brother whilst paying close attention to Izuna, not wanting the toddler to injure himself whilst training. It was strange, Madara mused, to be training someone so young. The first time, Izuna had been trained by the clan elders alongside the other kids in their clan. Madara had only started to spar with Izuna after the latter had reached 7, at least, due to how far they were in strength. He had to first learn how to soften his blows to avoid giving any unintentional injuries to his brother. Now, during his second childhood, it was Madara who took the initiative to train his little brother. Others might think he was heartless for pushing someone so young to become a shinobi, but Madara knew that this was the best course of action to protect his younger siblings. The stronger they were, the fewer people that could kill them. It was also better for him to be the one who trained them. Tajima and the clan elders were merciless, always dishing out corporal punishment and only giving the barest amount of praises, or none at all. Although effective on a whole with competitiveness as a measure of strength, Madara didn't want that for his brothers. He would rather they not be hurt unnecessarily, be it physically or emotionally. He wanted them to enjoy as much of their childhood as possible, whilst also training to become child soldiers. Besides, he had once turned Obito, a dead last fool, into a powerhouse that could fight on par with an S-rank shinobi, a master puppeteer who pulled far too many strings to count, and someone who could control a Biju all within a limited span of 2 years. Hashirama's cells might have played an important part in speeding the process, but if it came down to it, Madara was confident that any student he trained would become a legend in their own right. "Aniki, did you see that I hits bullseye 10 times in row?" Izuna squealed with laughter, arms in the air as he celebrated his victory of nailing all 10 shurikens on the wooden target. Ryota jolted awake from his light doze due to the loud exclamation, causing Izuna to physically cover his jaw with his tiny hands, although his gleeful giggles slipped through his fingers once in a while. Madara only rolled his eyes fondly, automatically bouncing the infant in an attempt to comfort him. "Yes. I saw. Well done, Izuna." Madara lifted Ryota higher just in time to avoid the little one from being squashed by Izuna. The toddler having wrapped 2 skinny arms around Madara's middle and rested his chin on Madara's abdomen, a goofy and wide grin playing on his lips. Thank you, Aniki. For teaching me and be patient with me. Always, Ataudo." Blood splattered across his face as Madara plunged his blade into the kneeling shinobi's neck, causing the arterial blood to gush out and paint him red as he jerked his weapon free. His fully matured Sharingan spun in place as he took in the battleground, his eyes purposefully skimming past the bodies of his fallen clansmen. They had been returning from border patrol when they were suddenly ambushed by the Kurama clan. Madara had managed to escape their AoE Genjutsu trap almost immediately, but a few slow ones had been outright killed in their moment of delay. The Kurama clan, after all, were masters in Genjutsu even without the Sharingan to aid them. Truly a fearsome clan of illusionists. Now, after a full hour of intense battles, apart from Madara, only one more of his kin remained alive. The Kurama clan didn't pull any punches, having brought 2 dozens against them 7. Sensing a disturbance in the air behind him, he spun on his heels, sword raised to block the blade that had almost skewered him like a plump dango. The shinobi snarled, expression filled with an intense hunger for his flesh as he glared at Madara, teeth bared. Madara impassively scanned the man's form for any holes, his lethargic body moving slower than expected when he moved to dodge and redirect the attacks he was receiving. With the aid of his Sharingan, he avoided a few backstabs, jutsu, and shurikens that had been thrown his way, but it wasn't enough. He was bleeding from the many cuts and stabs littering his little body. As soon as his eyes captured a blind spot, however, he unhesitatingly dived in. Madara slotted his katana into the man's ribs and kicked the shinobi's midriff to gain distance. Whilst his opponent was distracted by the pain, stumbling backwards as he tightened his hand over Madara's katana's hilt to prevent further blood loss, Madara's fingers moved rapidly. Pain. Great fireball technique. The flames ate the man up along with the corpses near him, burning him alive as he howled in pure agony, the smell of burnt flesh and grilled meat invading his nostrils. If Madara had not been so used to it, he would have vomited. Some of the other shinobi did. It allowed for the last of his clansmen to take advantage of their momentary weakness. Knowing that the enemy's goal was to study the Sharingan to strengthen their Genjutsu formidability, Madara made sure to burn his clansman's corpse or throw shuriken at their eyes whenever he has a chance to. Madara grunted when his side was kicked, his small body hurled into the air as he felt some of his ribs creak under the force. As he was airborne, he saw the last of his clansmen fall, causing the enemies to roar in victory, thinking they have already won. As soon as he landed in a roll, he pushed himself to his feet and positioned himself into a defensive stance. He had fought against thousands once upon a time, but now, in the body of a bloody 6-year-old, he felt weak and powerless. His chest was heaving heavily for air, whilst the wounds scattered around his body throbbed, some of his organs bruised, and his bones fractured from the many fits of abuse he took. He gritted his teeth, glaring poisonously at the 10 remaining Kurama men left. They all wisely avoided making eye contact with him, fuck. But he could tell from their body language and expression that they were confident. Madara did, after all, make a sorry sight right now. You guys take care of the brat. I'll take this one back first, one of them cockily said as he pointed at the fresh corpse of Madara's kin. The only one not badly burnt or mutilated by him. The other Kurama clansmen agreed as they slowly inched closer to Madara from all sides, whilst that one bodily picked the dead Uchiha up, carrying the corpse much like one did a sack of potatoes. Taking a deep breath in, Madara decided that if he were to be taken out, he would only go with an explosion. And if he survived this, he refuses to hold back his trump cards from now on. Some secrets weren't worth the lives of his kin. What's wrong, baby Uchiha? Hoping for someone to save you? A man jeered. Why don't you start crying for your papa? That'll be a sight and maybe, just maybe, we'll spare you, another mocked. And didn't Akira say she needed someone to donate their sperm to her daughter? I bet having a half Uchiha in our clan would bring us many benefits, one other pondered, chatting amongst themselves as they continued to close in on him. He truly was being underestimated. The concept of hope is nothing more than giving up. A word that holds no true meaning, he responded to their taunting, a thin smile playing on his lips as his kama swirled into their evolved form. I would rather not use this before my chakra pathways mature, but beggars can't be choosers, right? Before any of them could react to his words, whatever was left of his chakra flooded out in waves, constructing a humongous blue skeletal figure that wrapped him safely inside its ribs. Knowing that he was on the verge of collapse, he had only summoned the bare bones, and even then, it took a great toll on him, his insides felt as if a few somethings had just burst open. The chakra construction roared, and if Madara weren't so exhausted, he would have sadistically laughed at how pale the Kurama clansmen had turned, their knees shaking from something never before seen in this time period. Even the one carrying his kin had frozen, pupils dilated to massive proportions. Not waiting for any of them to recover from their terror, his Susanoo slashed at them with its undulating blades, cutting half their numbers with a single move. That, however, caused them all to return to their senses. All of them separated and began throwing ninjutsu after ninjutsu, jinjutsu after jinjutsu, their desperate attempts at bringing him down. And it was working. The ribs of his Susanoo had cracked under pressure due to how brittle his restricted and immature chakra had made them. He was also having a hard time grasping reality from illusions, making it harder for him to dispel them. The silver lining was that they were all Chunin with C-rank jutsus at best. With a haggard exhale, Madara wiped his sweaty forehead as he focused on them, tears of blood rolling down his cheeks as his young eyes strained from using such immense power. Back then, he didn't require to activate his Manjikyu Sharingan to use Susanoo, but now, he was forced to. If only they had waited for him to reach his teen years, at the very least, before ambushing him, he would have crushed them within minutes, if not seconds. It took longer than he intended, but as soon as the last of his enemies were killed and his clansmen's heads smashed like watermelons, Madara collapsed to his knees, Susanoo breaking down as it disappeared. Every cell in his body felt as if it was tearing itself apart, a horrible sensation that was so painful it made him queasy. His body trembled from the agony, the biting cold, and the blood loss. Falling face first into the dirt, he closed his eyes and did his best to meditate. He needed to push past all the discomfort and concentrate on refilling his chakra pools. That was the only way for him to use Hiram Jutsu to heal himself. His only chance of survival. If he was lucky, nobody would pass by this area. He needed to retrieve all their armor due to the Uchiha's rock-bottom financial status. Tajima was truly a horrible accountant. Just before he entered a meditative trance, he mentally apologized to Izuna for missing his little brother's birthday. Madara allowed his fingers to be used as shoe toys by his teething baby twin brothers as he seated himself at the Ingawa on a floor cushion under the shade with a pot of green tea next to him and a lap full of two squirming infants, whilst he verbally instructed his two other younger brothers on their kata. Bend your knees more, Izuna. Use the momentum of your core to flow through your movements, Ryota. That was sloppy at best. Again from the very beginning. Izuna and Ryota both whined out complaints but complied anyway. The two boys were covered in a light sheen of sweat as the afternoon sun tanned their skins a healthy color. Madara himself was far too pale with dark circles and stress lines under his eyes, most of his time spent taking care of his siblings, whilst he trained his body indoors, never too far away from the twins. It has been 7 years since his arrival in the past. All of his little brothers were well and alive, Madara having foiled the latest 2 assassination attempts at Takumi and Yukumi's life, the exact same ones that had claimed them the first time around. His mother, on the other hand, had not been so lucky. It made Madara too paranoid to leave them alone, and even on missions, he would leave a shadow clone behind, despite the massive drain on his reserves. Currently, Madara was 12, Izuna 10, Ryota 7, and the twins, Takumi and Yukumi, still newborns at only 4 months of age. His father, Tajima, only visited them to assign missions or to check on their progress. The nannies were all but frightened away by Madara's impressive glares. If he were to be sent by the clan head's orders on missions, patrols, or the field with his brothers in arms, either Izuna or Ryota would take care of the twins on his behalf. His clone did a magnificent job of hiding in the shadows. He didn't trust strangers to care for his two vulnerable baby brothers, disregarding the fact that almost all Uchiha were connected one way or another. When Madara finally called for a break, Izuna and Ryota all but fell gracelessly to the grassy ground, groaning and moaning about Madara being an Oni-sensei. The wordplay always made him smirk discreetly into his high collar, whilst pretending to not hear a thing. Fixing a cloth sling on his front, he adjusted the two newborns and stood up soundlessly. Madara made his way to the kitchen, grabbed a few healthy snacks and drinks, and made his way back to the Ingawa. "Wash your hands first," Madara drawled as he slapped Ryota's itchy fingers away from the tray. The latter stuck his tongue out cheekily whilst running into the house, eager for treats as always. Izuna followed at a more sedated pace, before taking off in a sprint not a second later. The 10-year-old had always tried to be more mature when in front of Madara, but failed spectacularly as always, much to Madara's open amusement. He could only fondly shake his head at the two brats. As he settled down, he arranged the cubed fruits and vegetables to be divided into equal portions, so that the two would not bicker about him playing favorites again. It greatly amuses and confuses him how competitive they were for his favor. Izuna, as he slowly came to learn, was different compared to his first life. More outgoing. More childish. More lively, happier. And has a friendly rivalry going with Ryota, always trying to one-up the other in training or day-to-day activities. Frankly, it made his heart swell in parental, brotherly pride. Not that he loved his brothers any less back then, it was even in his own head, he was not quite sure how to put it into appropriate words without mucking up the emotion he felt whenever he sees them so vibrant. Perhaps it could be elation, contentment, jubilation. Whatever it was, he just knows that it was a positive emotion. And Madara, with how protective he was over his brother's emotional and mental state, had made sure that Tajima's bad influence would not spread to them. He knew that hatred bred for more hatred. And the Uchiha Senju feud had long lost its purpose. The only reason why they continued this meaningless vendetta was due to their bitter elders passing down their animosity to the younger generation, and when they grow old, they would continue to follow the tradition. Although not naive like Hashirama with their dream, Madara understood the concept of spilling less blood. To refrain from killing unnecessarily. However, they live in an era when wars were common. There would be casualties. And sacrifices needed to be made if one wanted to protect. For Madara, it was his life. He would sacrifice whatever he needed to sacrifice to protect his brothers and clan. Even if his future methods would have him bear the brunt of his clan's aversion and hostility. When the squabbling pair came back, they huddled against his sides as they snatched each other's snack, trying to one-up the other with their rivalry. Madara sat quietly on his zabuton, enjoying the serene atmosphere as he allowed Yukumi to tug roughly on his long mane and Takumi to continue gumming on his index finger, which was at a cooling temperature thanks to a handy baby-related jutsu. A ninja. Madara tilted his head slightly towards Ryota to show that he was listening. "Are you getting enough sleep?" Blinking at the unexpected question, Madara tried to remember when exactly he had last slept. The blank he came up with was slightly concerning, but he waved the question away with a murmured, "You need not concern yourself over my sleeping habits. I am well." He wasn't asking if you're fine or not, Aniki. Izuna rolled his eyes so hard Madara was afraid it would be stuck that way. Ryota's asking if you're getting enough sleep. Your eye bags have eye bags, and those eye bags have even bigger eye bags. Cheeky brat. Madara self-consciously poked at his eye bags. Izuna was not wrong on that part. Madara did, in fact, notice that the stress lines underneath his eyes were more conspicuous this time around. A reason why he decided to grow out his hair early, his fringe proving to be excellent coverage to shadow his exhausted and sickly features. To hide that he was slowly wilting away, how tired his body constantly felt. "I sleep enough to function," he ended up saying as he smoothened his fringe down to better cover his eyes. His answer, apparently, wasn't what Izuna wanted to hear. The latter threw his hands in the air, beyond exasperated. "Are Yukumi and Takumi keeping you up at night?" "We can always alternate," Ryota said tentatively. "Their closeness brings forth my peace of mind," he intoned. "Kami, Aniki. Can't you just say yes or no? You're speaking like an old man who only knows how to answer without actually answering. It's making my head spin." Izuna whined. Madara gave Izuna an unimpressed look, which only made the boy cross his arms with a pout. "Cute." In turn, it made Madara drop a surprise kiss to Izuna's forehead, causing the boy to petulantly scowl at him. "Looking after two babies on your own is tough. They're always making noise at night," Ryota tried again, which made Madara sigh under his breath. "As I said before, Ryota, I am not troubled with my own sleeping habits." Rest assured, Ataudo, I am not sacrificing sleep for our two youngest. He merely avoided sleeping whenever possible due to paranoia and never-ending night terrors. If that made him spend more time watching his baby twin brothers sleep, then all was good. Arg. I can't take it anymore. Aniki, you idiot. What Ryota means to say is that we can look after Taku and Yaku while you nap. You look like you really need one right now. Like, really need one. Izuna tugged on Madara's sleeve with a put-off look on his face, eyebrows furrowed and lips pursed. Ah. Now he understood. They were worried. About him. For him. Madara bent his head and used his burdenest of a hair to cover the small smile playing on his lips and the slight flush he could feel forming on his cheeks. Having his family care for him felt heavenly. He knew that Ryota and Izuna both loved him, but to actively see how much they care was pleasantly shocking to say the least. Oh? He raised his head with a smile, but this time, it was more sadistic than sweet. You're not getting out of training, you insufferable brats. Break's over. Run laps around the compound until I tell you to stop. Your stamina is contemptuous. The jaws of his two adorable little brothers dropped in shock before their features turned to despair. Despite how touched he felt, he wasn't good with expressing his emotions. Hence, he decided to show his affections by training them till the brink of collapse. His own version of love. This would keep them safer in the long run, better than any verbal declaration of adoration. As they dragged their feet, whining and complaining about Oni-senseis, Madara ducked his head and patted his cheeks, thoroughly embarrassed by their show of kindness. He truly didn't deserve to have such sweet brothers. But despite that, contradictorily, he was a selfish creature that would never let them go. His smile turned into a frown at that, his chest twinging painfully. He wondered when exactly he should start to distance himself from them. He has not the will to live past the creation of Konohagakure and the erasure of Dakizetsu, his soul too worn and tired to actually picture himself enjoying his retirement alone, his brother having married with their own families to look after. Perhaps he should do them all the favor and take himself out of the picture early in their life. The only memories they would have of him would be that of a protective older brother and strict teacher, not the broken and foolish man who only thought that to achieve peace, he needed to bring war into play. But then, who else would take care of them on his behalf when they were still young and vulnerable? To guarantee their safety. Not Tajima. The man proved himself useless the first time around. When Yukumi tugged harder at his hair, gurgling for attention, he pushed those dark thoughts to the back of his mind, to submerse and steep, and tickled his baby brother's stomach, loving the way he was cooed and giggled at in return. Perhaps Madara should have reflected more about the inevitable consequences his actions and inactions would bring into the past. One of them was even staring vigilantly at him in the eye. Rather than Hashirama, Madara was looking at the rather boyish features of one Senju Tobirama, the shinobi who would one day become the boogeyman to all Uchiha children. The boy looked as young as 10 years old, maybe younger even, with a black sleeveless shirt tucked into unfashionable hakama pants, followed by a pair of wooden flip-flops. His arms, without any armor to pad it, looked skinny and frail. It made Madara soften ever so slightly, but he kept his distance, knowing that despite his young age, Tobirama was not to be underestimated. What the future white demon of the Senju was doing at this particular creek when Madara had been and still was eagerly expecting for one Senju Hashirama's appearance was something that was of little interest to him. His only desire was to reacquaint himself with his former best friend, if he was even allowed to call then Hashirama as such after the cringe-worthy stunt he pulled in the future that wouldn't occur. Knowing that it would take a miracle for this younger version of his adversary to catch Madara unaware, he returned to skipping rocks on the water's surface, already having put the baby Senju out of mind, but still aware of his movements. Funnily enough, after so long of throwing nothing but weapons, he has all but forgotten the technique required to make rock skip further than twice. As predicted, on its third skip, the rock sunk depressingly into the waters. Unexpectedly, however, was the disdainful scoff heard from behind him, causing his muscles to loosen in preparation for any imminent attacks. The sound reminded him far too much of that grouchy Senju who constantly threw barbs at him during his time in Konohagakure, whispering ridiculous Uchiha conspiracies into Hashirama's ears. Madara instantly became enraged, mortified, mind clouded with the many memories of them antagonizing each other to hell and back. Madara would not be Madara if he allowed this insult to go unpunished. Moreover, he could never tolerate anyone standing behind him, paranoia and what-ifs always clawing insistently at his whole being. "Don't stand behind me," Madara screeched, "arsehole. You're obviously trying to distract me, you damn git." And without his say-so, his body acted on engraved habit, he swirled and shot a pebble at the younger male, before readying himself for Tobirama to avoid his projectile with infuriating ease and insult Madra's lack of accuracy afterward. However, his action must have been wholly unforeseen weirdly enough if he judged the look correctly. The pebble bounced off Tobirama's forehead innocently, leaving a circular red dot in place as proof of what had occurred not 2 seconds ago. The FFT Madara snorted unattractively at the completely nonplussed expression the albino was wearing before losing all restraint. He threw his head back and roared with laughter, hands on his stomach as he fought to keep the mirthful tears at bay. His brazen sniggering, unfortunate, snapped the befuddled Senju back to reality. With an absolutely livid glare, which Madara secretly found adorable, not that he would ever verbalize that out loud, the Senju swung an angry fist towards Madara in retaliation. Having expected as much from the short-fused savant, he easily sidestepped the younger shinobi's punch. Madara then goaded Tobirama as per routine, similar to how they would often squabble over every little matter, which they, strangely enough, covertly appreciated due to it being quite the stress reliever. They might have had an antagonistic and strictly professional relationship, but dealing with budding clan heads, elders, and paperwork was mentally taxing. It just so happens that their schedules tend to overlap until they were all but tearing each other's throats to get some reprieve. Really, Snowflake? My Falcons could throw a better punch and they're still aces. Shame on you. TSK. How disappointing. Tobirama didn't respond to his taunts immediately, though his expression did turn colder, if that was even humanly possible. The Senju continued to throw punches and kicks, and all the while, Madara was dancing around whilst snickering at the reddening face of one angry iceberg. Maybe Madara could make the other shinobi hit the boiling point and melt to his death this time. He mentally crooned at the possibility. As this was in play, Madara continued to spur the Senju on by trash-talking. Tobirama wasn't one to disappoint. He gave as good as he got. As if you're one to talk, mister, I can't skip rocks to save my life, Tobirama growled as Madara jumped, causing the boy's leg sweep to become entirely ineffective. I was out of practice. And far too busy for such infantile activities, he sneered defensively, even as he grabbed the Senju by the wrist and, unthinkingly, tucked him slightly to the right into a better stance before letting go, too used to correcting his two little brothers' pathetic forms during their daily sparring sessions. Keep making excuses, you uncultured swine. Maybe one day they'll even come true, Tobirama sneered right back, teeth bared in a mocking manner. Madara easily deflected all of his strikes, using his fingers to jab at the areas that required more work. Who are you calling an uncultured swine? He screeched in offense, which then caused his next choice of insults to be astonishingly juvenile even to his own ears. Thankfully, he did not degrade to childish hair-pulling. Yet. There was just something about Tobirama that made Madara want to poke and prod until the two of them exploded into petty name-calling that would make even toddlers cringe at their lack of maturity. Well, you have a big forehead. HMPH. Madara then ungenerously jabbed his toes extra hard into Tobirama's right hip, pushing the boy into a better defensive posture and producing a grunt of in pain from the albino. Means I'm intelligent, was the petulant response whilst aiming for a backhand to Madara's face. Madara easily deflected, all that sizable about you is your hair and ego. Can't even skip stones all the way to the other side of the creek. HMPH. Pig. You're such an insufferable brat, at least I don't have two left feet. I recommend that you take your dance lessons more seriously. It'll do you no good to play truant just to skip rocks, he jeered, smirking when Tobirama overextended and stumbled, proving to Madara that he did, in fact, have two left feet. I don't dance, Tobirama deadpanned with narrowed eyes, spinning in for a wheel kick. I can see that, Madara ridiculed while sliding forward with his back bent, one hand striking out to raise the other shinobi's ankle higher before retreating. TSK TSK, TSK. Sloppy footwork. Fuck you. Tobirama spat angrily, his brain caught up on the insult of his taijutsu skills. Using the core of his muscles, the albino changed his leg path into an axe kick, fluent and deadly. Madara grinned dementedly, eyes full of hunger as he raised his forearms and crossed it above his head. His ulna and radius creaked at the strain, which only made him hum in approval. No thank you. Although I applaud you for your stellar taste in men. Ultimately, I am humanity's finest specimen, thus I cannot blame you in your wicked desires. He blew a raspberry, making sure to look as smug as possible after that. Arg. Tobirama suddenly stopped moving entirely, pulling at his hair in frustration. At such an unexpectedly childish tantrum, Madara abruptly took a few steps back, finally noticing that he had been visualizing the then Tobirama in place of the now Tobirama, the adult figure dissipating, replaced by the younger and boyish one. Madara felt as if he had been slapped in the face with that realization. It dampened the gleeful high he felt for winning one of their petty arguments, which had caused the uptight albino to cuss out loud. No, it was not their arguments, he was in the past, not there. This was a version of Tobirama, not the version he was most familiar with, Izuna's murderer, Hashirama's advisor, Madara's adversary. Not knowing why he felt so betrayed and heavy by such a thought, he slipped away unnoticed, whilst the sweaty and haggard albino continued to mutter angrily to himself. He needed a moment with his mistress named Denial. For the following visits, Madara had been fully expecting to see a boy with a ridiculous bowl-cut hairstyle and poor fashion sense, grinning goofily at him from the other side of the creek, but much to his initial disappointment, he only saw an albino with an almost Sharingan red eyes and a petulant scowl, etched permanently on his cherubic face. Never has he encountered the one he used to call a best friend. Now, he only met with Senju Tobirama. Shockingly enough, he had to reluctantly admit that he enjoys their time spent together. It had, however, taken them approximately 13 meetings altogether before Tobirama gave out his name and Madara to give a shortened version Dara of his in return. Unlike back then, in this life, the name Madara was too well known on the battlefield. A healthy dose of paranoia never hurt anybody, and intrinsically, he wasn't lying. As soon as he pushed out those thoughts about meeting Hashirama in the near future, he started to wait for the dreaded day when Izuna would follow him on the orders of his father. It proved to be wasted time spent as his father did not notice his absence, too used to how Madara often fades into the background until called upon. Uchiha Tajima was truly a foolish man, too blind to truly see his heir's many strings that stretched from the shadows, binding the limbs of many of his clansmen and making them dance to his tune. Tobirama has no tails as well, seeing that he was one of the best censor nins around despite his young age. He would never come to the creek if followed, lest he risks both their lives in unnecessary combat. The brat, as much as Madara loathes to admit it, was by far smarter than him intellectually, having an IQ count that would make even a Nara feel dumb. Madara suspects that Tobirama did, in fact, investigate Dara and came up with Uchiha Madara, the murderer capable of horrendous monstrosity, the Uchiha devil, the one with wild hair, jaded abyss-gazing eyes, and gloved hands that were constantly caked in the blood of his foes. But it was to Madara's unexpected pleasure that the younger shinobi did not bring reinforcements to cut him down. The albino only stared at him for long periods of time before grunting and returning to his usual behavior of being an utterly obnoxious brat with a stick too high up his arse that even the sage of 6 paths could not pull out. Of Tobirama, there were no talks about dreamful peace times. There were only perpetual bickerings, spars that would often lead to Madara teasing and correcting Tobirama's taijutsu form, ninjutsu training, and quiet days when Tobirama would bring a few books for the occasional reading time and Madara imposing on them shamelessly. Yet, whenever he saw the flash of white hair rather than the expected chestnut brown, he would feel his chest constrict tightly for a few short moments, where his breathing would pick up and his heart would start pounding loudly in his ears, before he all but shoved those feelings aside to greet the Senju with a taunting smirk, masking all of those useless emotions and enervation with confidence he did not have. He knew what he had been feeling as of late, loss. At the fact that he has lost Hashirama so early in his second life without his knowledge. He knew subconsciously, however, whenever he saw Tobirama on the other side of the creek, that the only encounters he would have with the dorky man were on a warring battlefront. And that made Madara despondent. Fighting against a Hashirama who dreamt of peace without Madara inside was heartbreaking. There would assumingly be no persuasion of peace talks or the desperate calling of Madara's name to beat the sense into him. Only a battle cry for his head. It was not something he was looking forward to if he were being honest. There was also the potential that in this timeline, Tobirama could be the one to fight Madara in his brother's place, but those chances were slim and unlikely. Only Hashirama could outmatch Madara in the future, and Bitsuma would most definitely pit the Mokuton user against him once that became a clear fact. Even then, however, Madara would have decades upon decades worth of experience fighting a Hashirama, be they friendly spars or death battles. An unfair advantage until the Mokuton user grew into his utterly monstrous power levels that dwarfed Madara's own baseline. Hashirama was considered the strongest shinobi of all time for a reason, after all, and Hashirama, as loathed as Madara was to admit it, outclassed him badly. On the other hand, he obtained a tentative friendship with a boy with a permanently scowling face. It gradually eased his disappointment, and their meetings always gave him a peace of mind. He slept better nowadays, some of his dreams filled with positive feelings, rather than his usual damaging night terrors. With a sigh, Madara shook his head to free himself from his thoughts. His eyelids were heavy with lethargy, but his mind raced with one too many thoughts. His body was downright exhausted, however. Turning slightly towards the windows, he peered at the full moon outside, his stare full of longing for some kind of sign that he was on the right path. It was still red. The darkness of the night played little to no importance to his senses as Madara stalked through the forest, footsteps inaudible, even as he stepped on twigs and dry leaves. He was a man on a mission that he could not afford to fail. The shadow clone was, on his behalf, protecting his 4 little brothers as they slept, and in this manner, Madara would not be distracted, his full focal point on the task at hand. Madara has, for the past few months, been scouting the Senju borders and stalking the Senju patrols whenever his target was with him, and if not, he would return to his compound and guard his siblings whilst they were at their most vulnerable. At the present time, his target was with 4 adults, surrounded and within the center of their team's formation. The four shinobi were at least Jounin in their chakra reserves, which was highly unusual since, during the Warring States period, elite ninjas were all but hoarded into the front lines. He assumes that his target's young age and lineage played an important role in this particular placement. Madara reckons that they were on orders to teach, as well as to guard, his target somewhat similar to how the Uchiha train their rookies. His pitch-black eyes scrutinize them from head to toe, digesting their trim-woven clothing, variant weapons, and well-cut armor. In times like these, he envies how minted the Senju were compared to the Uchiha. Custom-fitted child armor was an extravagant expense that their clan could never afford, despite how keen Madara desired them for his little brothers. Discounting their children-sized warriors, even the majority of his more mature clansmen wore only their high-collared mantles to battle. It was no wonder they often came back with grievous injuries or in a body bag. Madara's fists clenched. Despite his best efforts, resources were ridiculously hard to obtain and easy to use up. Although Madara has discreetly guided their farmers on agronomics, thus decreasing his clan's chances of starvation, the crops they painstakingly grew were mostly traded to fund their future battles. Ejima would often disregard their budgetary and purchase worthless consumables, such as explosive tags or shuriken, using up what little investment Madara has painstakingly assembled. The man was like a bloodhound, sniffing around their home until he discovers Madara's hidden stashes. It was only thanks to his storage seal that Madara was able to inconspicuously ration his clan's livelihood, minimizing their chances of dying due to the lack of sustenance. Just as he was about to continue his inner tirade and anti-Tajima remarks, his intuition screamed that something was up. It was then he sensed it, a dozen chakra signatures incoming, and fast. Knowing that it would be difficult to keep his identity a secret if he were to intercept and engage them in combat, he snatched up a rock and threw it at the general direction of the incoming signatures. That got the Senjus' attention. They communicated with their own version of hand signs and cautiously increased their vigilance. Thankfully, one of them seemed to be a sensor type, although quite lacking by Madara's standards. The sensor gestured quickly to the direction of the signatures, and they retreated the other way. Madara situated himself near to his target's group, his own chakra compressed to barely their levels. Keeping his sensing ability open, he tracked the movements of the dozen non-Senju chakra behind him. They seemed to be entirely unaware that the Senju had changed course, their movements neither increasing nor decreasing. Madara could only assume that the interlopers were either passing through the Senju clan's land or on a deliberate hunt to weed out their numbers. But judging by the size of the interlopers' group, the latter seemed more likely. And before Madara could ponder more on their identity or which clan they hail from, they suddenly surged forward with incredible momentum, their chakra flaring almost eagerly, thrilled at having found their prey, as they gave chase. He would have stopped in his tracks, turned around, and assassinated them one by one to lessen the risk of his failing his mission, but with how often he scouted the Senju territory, he knew that the Senju guards were leading the interlopers to one of the more nastier traps. Madara approves and decided to be a bystander for now. Madara felt his pupils dilate, his breathing hitched ever so slightly when he finally saw Hashirama, the bowl-cut somehow sight for sore eyes. A man, teenager, not yet a man, stood to his father's right, whilst his younger brother was to Bitsuma's left, the both of them wearing fitted yet bulky green-plated armor. The metal coverings aided their scrawny stature, providing them with excellent protection against stray projectiles and blades. Hashirama has on an expression of somberness, lips pursed, brows furrowed, and chocolate brown eyes determined. It made Madara feel bittersweet nostalgia, a tsunami of regrets and self-disappointment at having that look directed at him. He saw that countenance one too many times during their clan wars back then, the man too stubborn and optimistic to take Madara's no for an answer. "Madara, please." Hashirama stretched out a hand, palm upwards as he pleaded for Madara to consider his offer of a ceasefire. An alliance between Hai no Kuni's two strongest clans will bring forth a new era of peace for us. Think about our future children, old friend, our clan's union has only benefits. The Uchiha clan head bit the inside of his cheek, heart thumping loudly in his chest as he considered his options. Madara has always dreamt of peace, where his little brother, as well as all his clan's children, would be safe and protected. The Senju clan head must have seen his indecision, for Hashirama suddenly beamed, reminding the wild-haired man about their time spent together as children. He took half a step forward, but was stopped by an almost painful grip on his bicep. Izuna leaned against his side, eyes shadowed by his fringe, as his lips thinned into a straight line. "Don't be fooled, Aniki. We can't trust them. What if this is all a ploy to loosen our guard? This Hashirama is not your friend, Aniki. He's our enemy, the Senju clan head, the clan that slaughtered Ryota in cold blood." At those words, Madara violently recalled the body of his second younger brother, desecrated and in pieces, the Senju symbol engraved arrogantly onto the decapitated forehead. He retreated 2 steps back, activated his Sharingan, and brought up his gunbai. He saw Hashirama's smile falter, but he blocked the tsunami of emotions he was experiencing to the back of his mind and coolly stared at his former friend. The silence seemed to last for an eternity before Madara roared for his men to charge. The Senju clan head had his shoulders drooped in disappointment, but his eyes were blazing with determination. It made Madara tremble, whether it be with expectation or dread, he felt no desire to figure out. Then Madara never did see the disturbing smile playing on Izuna's lips. Only when this memory was replayed by now Madara in his earlier years did he notice. Thus it got him thinking, when had Izuna been possessed? Had Madara been manipulated his entire life? How many deaths had Dakuzetsu orchestrated? Had all his little brothers passing been Madara's fault? If Dakuzetsu had done it once, what stopped it from doing so again without Madara noticing a thing? The never-ending questions only brought a sense of foreboding and unease upon him. He shook his head and focused on the present. He shouldn't be distracted during such a time. After all, a momentary mistake could lead to fatal outcomes. The Senju were tensed and ready on the other side of the grassy field, close enough to engage in a glaring contest, yet far enough to defend or attack, whichever action more appropriate. His friend Tobirama, not Hashirama, his mind sullenly reminded him stared impassively at him, frosty red orbs not once moving away from his visage. Madara bent his head slightly in a greeting, smiling slightly when his greeting was returned by the icy Senju, albeit more stiffly. His body felt oddly warm at Tobirama's uncomplicated acceptance of Madara's background, which in turn made Madara frown. If he were to get sick now, it would be most unfortunate. Leaving the fate of his health to Mother Nature, he pushed those useless observations aside to ponder on other more important matters. Knowing about Madara's blood-stained horror stories and seeing it live were two entirely different concepts. Madara was a war genius, his battlefield persona more heinous than the average shinobi. The Uchiha did not accept that side of him, what say Tobirama, an overly cautious Senju who was also too young malleable by outside forces. With his head tilted slightly forward, his fringe ominously shadowed his features as he idly fingered the handle of his gun by Uchiha. He needed to stop thinking too much. This was, again, hardly a good time to ponder on such issues. Sighing inaudibly, he propped his weapon of choice on his shoulder, the weight of his gun by reassuring. He knew he made for a ridiculous picture, however, a 13-year-old wielding an oversized fan that was as large as he was tall, if not larger. He hadn't had the chance to use his favorite weapon this early in the timeline before, even Tajima had looked at him weirdly when he brought a gun by with him to this skirmish. Izuna stood at Madara's left, wearing only their standard mantle without armored protection. Madara strongly wished Tajima would gather more clients and fix their financial situation already, an impressive scowl engraved on his cherubic features and dual-wielding two unsheathed Tanto swords. Madara's hand fell on his tensed slender shoulder, squeezing it gently in comfort. His little brother's muscles relaxed, albeit slightly, at the assurance that Madara would look after him. This would be Izuna's first time fighting against an army in one of their wars. It was also Madara's first time seeing both Hashirama and Tobirama on the opposite side of the battlefield, despite the many times he has crossed blades against the Senju army, most of the time engaged with Bitsuma's second in command. It was a little amusing that the three were virgins in the Uchiha vs Senju war, despite how skilled they were. But Madara should not compare himself to them. It would be otherwise unfair. Everyone else would only enter the major clan wars when conditions were met to avoid useless deaths. Hence, Madara knew the Senju's elites by face alone as their clans always clashed, and vice versa, almost always resulting in a stalemate. He had been drafted into this playing field as soon as Tajima saw his fully matured Sharingan, which was at the tender age of 7 when he had been careless. His first time had been hectic and messy, with many Senju twice his size, trying to cut down the tiny and vulnerable baby Uchiha. They were probably rolling in their graves with regret right now. Madara had done his best to keep his little brothers out of any major clan battles, and it had worked. Most of the time Izuna and Ryota would coincidentally be out on mission runs when they were preparing a strike force. Until now, that was. There was no more delaying for Izuna since he has awakened his Sharingan a few months back. Madara did his best to train his eldest baby brother in mastering his 1 Sharingan, with a limited time given in order to prepare him for the worst. And his predictions always came true as of late. Izuna was drafted into their army by the clan elders. It seems Bitsuma has brought his 2 eldest sons with him this time, Tajima stated the obvious, voice an imposing baritone. Madara, they are your targets. I expect for you to bring me their heads. Failure is not an option. Izuna, you are to remain close to Hikaku and assist whenever required. Both Izuna and Hikaku, a teen older than Madara's physical body by a good few years, gave a verbal affirmative whilst Madara simply nodded, his mane bouncing at his movement. He has never once spoken out loud to his father in this life, and he would continue to uphold his silence whenever in the man's presence. Then, as if there was an invisible signal, both clan heads raised their right arm in complete sync, glaring at one another with venom in their eyes, before slashing their hand forward. The two armies ran, battle cries taking over the grassy field as blades clashed, shuriken flew, and jutsus run wild. Madara kept his senses open, constantly aware of Izuna's movements, even as he ducked the incoming projectiles and swung his gunbai, producing a huge gust that blew back a portion of the Senju forces, as if they were mere paper dolls. Their surprised exclamations made his ego swell. When one overly eager Senju shinobi he has never seen before blocked his way, Madara didn't stop in his tracks. He raised his gunbai and slammed it into the Senju's side, batting the man away like a fly with a strength that did not proportionate to his young body. The shinobi went flying, some of his ribs probably broken, only for another unfamiliar face to step forward in his place. The newcomer, however, was too near for Madara to swing his gunbai in a wide arc. At the goal, Madara could only sigh, knowing that he was yet again being underestimated due to his body's young age. It grew tiring after a while. He dodged the soldier's enthusiastic thrust and grabbed a hold of the man's front armor. Seeing that he was shorter, he swiftly tugged, his unexpected action having caused the Senju to stumble down to his height. Madara reckons his opponent was only Chunin in skill just by that alone. As soon as they were on eye level, his dark eyes turned crimson. His opponent did not have any time to react as he was instantly pulled into a genjutsu. Madara released his hold on the armor and sidestepped the frothing man as he fell to his knees. Making his way through downed bodies and trained killers was a headache. It was only half an hour later after he had been thoroughly soaked in the blood of his foes and his own wounds did he reach one of his two intended targets. He had done his best to disable, but when fighting for one's life, the easier option was always to kill. A moment of hesitation would, in turn, bring his downfall. Madara self-consciously wiped his cheek with one billowing sleeve when Tobirama paused to take in the state of him, not noticing how it had just increased the mess on his face due to how soiled and singed his clothes were. He was sure he looked messier than he felt, with blood soaking through his mantle and hair and his gunbai stained almost completely red. He frowned unhappily when he saw the wounds inflicted on his friend, the grip on his gunbai's handle tightening. Knowing that he could not do anything about it, he angrily exhaled from his nose and raised his weapon. That made Tobirama wary, his muscles bunching up in preparation to dodge. After a few moments of deliberation, he thought better of it. He strapped his gunbai to his back and engaged Tobirama in a taijutsu battle, as the albino somehow seemed to have lost his sword. Newbies would only learn to keep their weapons close after they have gained more experience, if they were still breathing. His lips quirked upwards, his smile hidden by the high collar of his mantle, when he noticed the improvement in Tobirama's form. His strikes were precise and his footsteps steady. Madara's lesson seemed to stick, but he had expected no less from the Senju genius. Outstanding muscle memory, Tobirama, he whispered his praise, startling the albino slightly, your dance has improved tremendously. I'm glad. To show how happy he was with Tobirama's progress, he planted a foot into the younger male's solar plexus, causing the albino to gag as he fell to his knees, hands on his abdomen. Not even thinking of stopping his advances, Madara grabbed the Senju by his white strands and mercilessly tugged on it, forcing the tween to bare his neck. The coercion of the Sharingan, when mixed with his skills in Genjutsu, was a fearsome combination. Even then Tobirama would have done everything to avoid it. This younger and more inexperienced Tobirama, however, reacted 1 second too late. Of course, Madara would not hurt his friend too badly. The petulant brat would nag his ears off otherwise. Demonic illusion. Hell viewing technique, he murmured, his Sharingan spinning in a hypnotic manner. Tobirama's red eyes glazed over and his face turned slack, a trail of saliva leaking down his chin. However, just as Madara was pulling out a kunai to temporarily disable Tobirama, a few non-serious wounds that would leave him debilitated for a month or two, he was knocked skywards by thick wooden branches that sprouted from the earth. He grunted as he landed in a safety roll, a hand on his bruised abdomen, and an annoyed glare at the Mokuton user, who had foiled his plans of keeping Tobirama temporarily safe and away from the brutal war. Tobirama. Hashirama yelled in panic as he cradled his younger brother's limp form to his chest, stay with me Tobi. What did you do to him? Before he could decide on his next course of action or rather, whilst he had been thoroughly distracted by Hashirama's distressful agitation, Bitsuma's second-in-command appeared next to him, a slash aimed at his eyes and killing intent leaking from the man in spades. If Madara had actually been a 13-year-old kid, his body would have undoubtedly started to tremble uncontrollably due to the heavy pressure exerted by the Senju. It would have been the prime opportunity to forever blind the Uchiha heir and give his clan a moral down. Alas, Madara was decades older in mind and had faced down Bijuus in his spare time. He performed an awkward back handspring just in the nick of time. The sword had cut an ugly gash under his right eye and used the momentum in his hands to push himself off of the ground rather than going along with the retreating motion, a foot aimed at the elder shinobi's wrist. Crack. To have his ankle cleanly broken in half with a portion of his tibia sticking out of his skin hadn't been his intention. It was a miscalculation on his part to have not added his lighter body weight into account. The sword went flying, indeed, but Bitsuma's second in command was uncaring to that fact, more eager to slow Madara's speed than anything else. He allowed Madara's foot to connect to his wrist, releasing his weapon without worries, and captured the Uchiha's ankle in his hands. It took less than a second for Madara to realize the error of his judgment, he should have retreated, and that split second had cost him. Madara didn't react to the pain. He had endured worse than just a useless foot to stand on. Using the tight muscles of his core, he curled his upper body upwards whilst taking a deep breath in, his fingers locked in a tiger hand seal. The man, with alarm in his eyes, released Madara's ankle hurriedly, but it was far too late. Pain. Phoenix Age fire technique, he exhaled directly into the man's face before landing on a handstand, cartwheeling away towards the direction of the closest Uchiha signature, until he was all but leaning against one of his kin, his breaths coming out in puffs, chest heaving for oxygen. Madara felt relief when he looked up and saw it was Hikaku. The other teen was neutral, he neither likes nor dislikes Madara. Hikaku looked bruised and beaten, but he still kept an arm wrapped protectively around Madara's waist, expression contemplating, as if he was debating if he should lift Madara altogether. Izuna. Madara panted, not up to talking in full sentence just yet, and winced slightly when his ribs were jolted by their high-speed movements. Of Tajima-sama. Busy as he was from the blood loss and fatigue, Madara almost demanded Hikaku to rush him to their clan head. He did not trust Tajima to keep Izuna safe at all. Before Madara could do so, however, a loud shout was heard. Retreat. With blood and adrenaline pounding in his ears, he didn't know who was the one who actually called for a retreat, but retreat they all did. Both the Senju and Uchiha rushed back to their respective sides, picking up injured, unconscious, or dead comrades along the way. The first thing Madara did when he saw Izuna was to head directly to his younger brother, his gloved hands immediately flying to pat Izuna's body. At the moment, he ignored how blank Izuna's expression was, more keen on searching for any life-threatening wounds, and sighed in relief when they were at most superficial. He then nodded at Hikaku, showing his gratitude for protecting Izuna and supporting Madara, and mentally taking note of their interactions for future purposes. The teen smiled grimly in return, head bowed slightly in a show of respect to their clan's heir. "Aniki," Izuna whispered, too pale, too expressionless, too lost. It caused an ache in his chest, dread and protectiveness pooling in his gut. Without caring that they were still on the battlefield, he pulled his little brother, young, still so young, too young, into a hug. Izuna, unlike how he often yells in embarrassment at being treated like a kid, did nothing to stop him. Skinny arms wrapped themselves around Madara as trembling fingers dug bruises into his back, hiccoughs and hitched breathing being smothered against Madara's chest. "Esatoshi-san, DT died. Akinari-san. Haidio SS-san. All. They're all." The metallic and rusty smell of both fresh and flaking blood on Aniki was thick, clashing horribly with his more soothing scent of pine needles and ashes. But it was the better alternative to the stench of burnt meat, piss, and shit. More horrendous than any abattoir and made him violently ill from just a whiff. Izuna wanted nothing but to flee and never look back at such carnage ever again, no matter how unrealistic that may be, thanks to the recall ability of the Sharingan and his duties to his clan. He knew he was already part of their army, and only in old age, permanent disability, or death will he be allowed out. When he had been younger, the prospect of being selected would have made him a very happy child. Izuna has envied Aniki, and he felt disgusted by his own feelings. How could he betray the one who protects him by allowing such things to fester inside him? For his older brother's talent. But this madness. Insanity. Death, more death, and never-ending plague. Never before has Izuna felt such dismay and sadness for his Aniki, all feelings of envy, having left him as soon as he had been flanked by the bulkier and taller Senju warriors. If not for Hikaku, Izuna would have been a goner. And this was Aniki's day-to-day life. It scared Izuna. What if Madara Ani was Kia one day? What if Madara Ani had been Kia when he was younger? It chilled Izuna to the bone. He had been such a foolish child. How could he have once upon a time envied Madara Ani for such a brutal life? He would do anything to remain ignorant of this war of theirs with the Senju. The hatred in their enemies' eyes were intense, and it burned. He could feel resentfulness build up inside of him, all directed at his father, elders, Senju, whoever else he didn't know, the ones who had once upon a time forced a 7-year-old Madara Ani, from the whispers he heard from his clansmen, much to his horror, to this type of madness one too many times, causing his Aniki to become so desensitized to human life that he even disregards his own. He was not blind to his older brother's faults and weaknesses. Izuna tightened his hold on his brother, not wanting to let go in fear that his brother would lose the last of his rationality and end it. Had it been Izuna in Aniki's shoes, he knew he would not have survived such inhumanity and madness shoved at him from such an age. Now he understood why Aniki did not want him on the front lines. He feared for Izuna's safety. Even Izuna feared for his own safety. But what other options did he have? Were they born to die at the hands of Senju, and vice versa? So many of his uncles and cousins have already perished just now. No, he shouldn't think about it. Or else he would vomit all over Aniki, and infected wounds were the last thing he wanted Madara Ani to have. How Nikki can still remain kind and gentle after experiencing such monstrous things, he did not know. But he knew he would have to grow stronger so that he could protect his Aniki in return from now on, protect Aniki from himself, even. And he wouldn't care if Aniki continues to smother him with overprotective affection anymore. He needed all the comfort he could get after this devastating experience. They're all dead. What if Ikaku-sen had been a second slower? I would have also. Izuna keened. Izuna, hey. I'm here. Aniki is here. Listen, we can't stay here any longer. I'm going to carry you. Everything's going to be. Madara bit his own tongue to physically halt his next choice of words. Fine didn't seem to be applicable nor appropriate at this circumstance. You'll cope with this, I promise. Knowing that this was not a safe place for Madara to continue reassuring his brother, nor permit Izuna a breakdown just yet, he bodily lifted and repositioned Izuna until the little one has his arms over Madara's shoulders and legs wrapped around his hips. He whispered for the younger Uchiha to hold onto tightly before he shot off towards his fellow clansmen, purposefully ignoring the way his body protested with every painful step he took, his ankle making awful crunching sounds. Unlike the Senju, Uchiha medics weren't permitted onto the battlefield by the elders and clan heads' law or to even leave their compound. They were too few in numbers. The Uchiha, after all, were literally born for aggressive assaults, not healing. For even a stubborn bastard like Madara, it had taken him almost all of his lifespan to master it. Hence, those few gifted Uchiha medic nins were cherished, never to be left without someone to guard them. And Madara would rather die than remain a prisoner in his own home, which was why he omitted many of his capabilities. If Madara had not the aptitude for perfecting whatever he learns, be they Fuinjutsu, Iram Jutsu, or rock skipping, Abido, someone who had had half their head and upper body smashed into mush would have undoubtedly died before Madara could successfully implement Hashirama's cells into him. It wasn't luck that kept the boy alive. And it wasn't by chance that the younger Uchiha was barely able to lift a finger without feeling pure agony, neither crippled or lively, just debilitated and compliant, until Madara's words were able to seep deeply into his head and Madara tightened his grip on Izuna and entered the center of the protective formation of his clansmen, running alongside those that were too injured to defend themselves from outside forces. His fellow veterans politely turned away to give Izuna and the other new recruits a semblance of privacy, even as they continued to retreat. Everyone here knew exactly what a new recruit was going through. They had, after all, been in the exact same shoe once upon a time, when all of them were still far too young to be brought into the frontier, now damaged and jaded despite only being in their late teens to early 20s. Not many exceeded the age of 30 in these violent times. Mental breakdowns were painfully common for first-time youngsters that fought in one of their major battles. Some vomited immediately upon reaching the compound, some couldn't sleep for days to come, some would hide in their rooms to cry for their dead relatives and friends, completely traumatized by the event, and others came back in body bags. Tiled soldiers were pitiful little things, fighting for reasons unknown, whilst their leaders continued to draft more and more of them into the army. Madara, despite not an actual child, felt that adults were silly in their conquest for peace. He had been silly. Seeking amity whilst at the same time spilling blood, it was antithetical yet factual. Two sides of the same coin. They had lost so many good men to it. Their fallen kin, many of them currently being carried back to the compound for a bonfire funeral, perished due to their ancestors' feud. Tajima's second in command would then go around to inform their parents or spouse or children that they have fallen in battle. It made him wonder if anyone had given him a proper traditional Uchiha funeral after the Fourth Shinobi World War had ended. Probably not. There were no Uchiha but Sasuke left alive, after all. As soon as they reached the compound, Izuna was violently snatched from his protesting arms and thrown to Hikaku before Tajima all but dragged Madara to the clan head's office by his hair. When he finally came out an hour later, it was with twice the bruisings he had already gotten from the battle. Punishment for failure, his father had intoned, striking Madara again and again and again and again until he finally lost all rage and barked for Madara to leave his sight. Izuna, with tears running down his reddish cheeks, rushed to Madara's side the second he enters his bedchamber. His younger brother bandaged and stitched what he could, then began soothing the fresh bruises with gentle head pats and peppered kisses, imitating what Madara had done when Izuna had been younger and more prone to accidental falls. It helped ease the fatigue away. Was it Lady Fate or Madame Destiny that insisted Madara run left and right into someone of Senju origin? He could only shake his head at the bizarre string of coincidences. He had only wanted to remove himself from the unexpected blizzard during his run back from a successful mission. This cave he was currently standing inside of had been his first choice, hidden in plain sight and narrow enough to block out the cold weather. But, unfortunately, it came with unwanted company. "You alive, kid?" Madara toed the clammy-looking 9-year-old boy, who was leaning bonelessly against one part of the wall, a small puddle of blood pooling underneath him. Whilst his eyes carefully assessed the young shinobi for potential ambushes or trickery, he simultaneously compared the child's measurements with Ryuta's. His second younger brother currently lacked any protective gear, and if this kid wasn't going to make it out of here alive, Madara would rather the boy donate his armor to someone who needed it more. The only eyesore would be the Senju crests engraved on the neck guard. But Madara was always efficient and handy, ridding them would not be an issue in the long run. He crouched down to one knee, squinting his eyes suspiciously at the barely breathing and severely Senju. The kid didn't look at all familiar to Madara, which meant that the child must have died long before Konohagakure was founded. He felt pity and sorrow that someone so young was dying from such terrible injuries, purposeful wounds that inflicted unnecessary pain rather than a swift death, but he wasn't a saint who would attempt to save every single wounded individual he came across. He was a shinobi, a damn good one too. Even a toddler wielding a kunai was an enemy. What say this lad? Madara could be putting the lives of his kin at risk if he were to heal someone who was clearly from a hostile clan. Cold, indeed, but Madara has always known himself to be cruel and heartless. The boy's hair, however, pulled at Madara's gut to investigate and not leave the child to his fate. Didn't Hashirama once say that he has a younger brother with skunk-colored hair? Itama, was it? He pondered out loud, fingers drumming idly against his chin. The name caused the boy to twitch, and that was enough for Madara to consider his options. A short moment of contemplation later, he decided that he would rather be safe than sorry. If this was indeed Senju Itama, Madara not healing him would have added yet another column to his already long list of regrets. He didn't want the now Tobirama and now Hashirama to know the pain of losing a sibling. It was a dreadful experience Madara wished to never repeat, an echo of nothing but hopelessness, helplessness, and bitterness in his heart, easily malleable to outside manipulations due to the unyielding hurt and loss he constantly felt. Those ugly emotions of despair had driven him, once a protective guardian who dreamt of building a settlement for the future generation, into the madman seeking an illusionary world without caring about the repercussions or fatality. Even then Tobirama had fallen prey to that brand of insanity, loneliness and desperation having driven Ito Tensei into creation. They were not that different, Tobirama and Madara, both wanting their brothers alive again one way or another. It was only that the former knew when to stop and move on, whilst the latter allowed his grief to consume and drive him into a broken mess of hatred and instability. If he could prevent a bad ending from happening, why should he not? He had already changed his little brother's and Kawarame's fate, anyway. Besides, he owed then Hashirama too much to turn a blind eye. Acting on the presumption that this was Hashirama's and Tobirama's youngest brother, Madara lifted one glowy green hand and placed it atop the boy's armored chest, doing an initial scan. If he was wrong in his assumption, he could always brush this action of his into his soul's extremely tiny good deeds bin. When his chakra feedback that Itama had internal bleeding due to the many stab wounds on his abdomen and a shite ton of broken bones, Madara had almost declared him a lost cause. These kinds of injuries were similar to death sentences in this period. Nobody in this era, apart from Hashirama with his innate regeneration ability, could survive such wounds, what with their lack of advanced Hyryojutsu and treatment plans, many of which Tsunade created. "You're quite the lucky boy, Senju, for I have actually taken the time to study her arsenal," he grumped at the skunk-haired boy. Being all alone in that underground cave was boring. After putting maybe Itama into a supine position, Madara started a small fire before sitting in seiza by the boy's side. With pinched eyebrows, he used ninja wires to half-heartedly bunch up his mane into a messy bun, freeing his face from the bird's nest he called his hair. Subsequently, he relieved the boy of all possession except his clothes and placed two glowing blue hands on the boy's heavily injured abdomen. Madara did not bother with anesthesia and went straight into surgery with the help of chakra scalpels. The procedure took hours and thankfully, the snowstorm kept people away. There was no need for Madara to waste time or energy by halting his treatment in order to take care of uninvited guests. Sitting on the back of his heels, Madara wiped the perspiration on his forehead. Manipulating his large chakra pool with such precision has always given Madara a headache. It drained him mentally more than physically, the memories of healing Obito playing like a broken record within his mind's eye. His tongue tasted oddly like ash at the reminder. Knowing that the boy was now out of danger, Madara shrugged off the haori he was wearing over his mission yukata and wrapped the boy into a burrito, not wanting his hard work to be wasted if maybe Itama died due to hypothermia. Madara then made himself as comfortable as he could get on his side of the wall, huddled into a ball, and waited impatiently for the blizzard to wane. He must have gone into a meditative trance, as his limbs were stiff and his neck aching when he moved into another position. Madara yawned as he stretched his muscles, groaning blissfully when his spine popped at all the right places. Where a childish voice suddenly croaked, maybe Atoma's head peeking out from the clothes burrito, skin pale and clammy. The borders of Hai no Kuni. Niraim no Kuni, he grunted, rubbing a heavy-lidded eye. The cold has always made him lethargic. However, that was no excuse to drop his guard. A kunai in his sleeve was ready to be used at a moment's notice. Maybe Atama sluggishly sat up, Madara's Haori flopping down his lap. In a daze, his eyes passed Madara's form unseeingly as he stretched, only to snap out of his drowsy state not a second later. His chocolate brown eyes were filled with awe as he dazedly patted his healed abdomen. I am healed. How? Did you heal me? The Senju asked, sounding overwhelmed as his fingers traced over the expanse of healthy skin on his stomach. The younger shinobi then shifted slightly, glancing about and grimacing when he saw the terrible weather. Ichiha shrugged nonchalantly, I did. Why? The Senju's eyes were wary, fingers twitching rather noticeable over his shuriken pouch. Madara wasn't worried seeing that all of the boy's weapons and armor were inside his storage seal tattoo. I'd rather not share a cave with a dead body for an undetermined amount of time, rather than telling the boy that Madara was friends with his maybe older brother Tobirama, Madara casually drawled in a bored manner. You could have just thrown me out. I wasn't in any condition to fight back either way, maybe Atama pointed out rather stupidly, in Madara's opinion. He could not help but roll his eyes at the younger shinobi. Senjus and their honesty. I'll be sure to do that the next time I see you painting the ground red. I would rather you not. All of a sudden, the two-toned Senju slumped, expression changing into something softer and less guarded. I appreciate your kindness, mister. Truly. Not many would do something like this. My name is Atama. If we ever meet again, I swear I'll repay this debt back to you. Please tell me your name. Madara turned away, uncomfortable with the grateful stare he was receiving. It seems Hashirama was not the only one in his family to have such weird mood swings. You may call me Dara, little one. He paused for a split second before bulldozing shamelessly, eager to change the topic, and I'm taking your armor as compensation for my humanitarian aid. Madara yelped when Izuna yanked too roughly, the abrupt pull of the comb, causing him to collapse backwards into Izuna's lap. He directed a glare at the 13-year-old, mumbling inaudible profanities, even as he returned to his floor cushion, automatically falling into Seiza. Sorry, Dara-ani, Izuna apologized half-heartedly, more focused on having his fingers dig through Madara's monster of a hair for the missing comb. If you truly wish to apologize, you will cease and desist this pointless endeavor. Madara cut himself off to bite the insides of his cheek when Izuna made a sound of triumph and proceeded to try and extract the comb, tangled hair and all, from his mane, with all the finesse of a raging biju. When was the last time you actually combed? It's full of knots even if it's floofy, which is completely unfair, by the way, like the fur of a wild Siberian cat. Or maybe a Highland cow. Oh. A duster budgie. Yep, definitely that. Both the birds and Aniki have 3/4 of the face covered, after all. But then there's the Madara prayed to Sage for endless patience. I will not kill my little brother. I will not kill my little brother. I will not kill my little brother, as he mentally counted backwards from 60. Despite how slowly he went from number to number, Izuna was still trying and failing. He might add to detangle his tresses from the teeth of the comb. And he would not stop comparing Madara to fluffy animals. Which part of him looks anything like them? Maybe the duster budgie, Madara grudgingly admits. Well? Izuna grumped expectantly, his expression a mix of amusement and frustration at his brother's ongoing silence. Madara's lips parted, ready to snap out an answer before falling into deep contemplation. When exactly has Madara taken the time to groom his hair? He shuffled through a decade worth of memories, starting from his unanticipated arrival into this second life of his. When he couldn't find such impressions, he dived deeper into memory lane. It took a few moments, but his perfect recall helped greatly. Madara had been about 14 when he last used a comb on his own. After that, he simply forwent grooming altogether. Even during his old age, he only cut his mane with a kunai when it grew too long and dragged all over the ground. It used to be Izuna who. Madara returned back to the present when he felt a finger poke at his cheek. Just in time, too, for he was feeling bittersweet longing at the memories of his past. What? He snapped, feigning annoyance as he batted the offending digit away. This might be far-fetched, but I'm just gonna assume you've never touched a comb in your life, Izuna stated dryly, sighing as if he had expected as much from him. In retrospective, I should have known better than to ask you anything about your personal care. Aniki, you're hopeless. Madara bristled, offended. What did Izuna mean by hopeless? He made sure he was as healthy as any other shinobi. He meticulously rationed his own food so that he ate the minimum required to stay fit. His brothers needed more than him as they were growing boys. It wasn't completely his fault his body was constantly tired. And that was due to the age of his soul, and appearance wasn't important to him. He had more urgent matters to attend to than waste time sitting in front of a mirror and fight a futile battle against his wild mane. I am not, he ended up saying firmly. He wasn't sulking, really, we're shinobi, there's no purpose in vanity. It's not vanity, Aniki. It's self-care. Learn the difference. Alright, you know what? I've decided we're taking the rest of the day off to pamper ourselves, Izuna announced in mock solemnity, looking ridiculous whilst at it, now turn around and sit still, so I can tame this bad boy into submission. Madara gave a blank look over his shoulder. Izuna returned it with one raised, unimpressed brow. Their stare-off lasted for about a split second before Madara grunted, looking away with a scoff. It wasn't a pout, really, damn it. It made Izuna smirk in victory. What a conceited brat, Madara groused inwardly with a harumphed. Sometimes, he wondered if he was spoiling them rotten. He was always too tolerant of them, and they know to take advantage of that weakness of his. It was also only them that Madara allowed positioned at his back, too mistrustful and insecure to permit anyone else. It was many hours and broken combs later, with Madara's temper close to snapping, and Izuna thoroughly exhausted by the workout, did they finally manage to tame his mane into a high ponytail, the end still long enough to touch the small of his back. It made him shiver when his bare neck was caressed by the wind. There we go. All done. Now we can all finally see more than a quarter of your face. I almost forgot what you look like, Aniki. Izuna sounded proud and pleased, which in turn made Madara's bad mood disappear. If his brother was happy, Madara was happy. What's this? Madara shuddered and jolted forwards when a finger suddenly traced his nape where one of his ink seals rested at. It was just his luck that today, of all days, Izuna had guilt-tripped him into grooming his hair whilst he was not wearing his usual high-collared mantle. It had slipped his mind that his long and tangled mess of a hair actually helped cover some of his tattoo seals. Aniki Izuna's careful voice made Madara wrap his ponytail around his neck in a bashful manner, as if it were a scarf, is that a tattoo? Knowing that it would be pointless to deny, he nodded, yes. Technically. It's nice, I guess. Izuna spoke slowly as if his brain had short-circuited, moving to sit in front of Madara so that they could talk face to face. Looks painful. It was, he grimaced in remembrance. It had taken him a whole day to meticulously ink his nape using 2 mirrors, almost killing his arms with such dreadful positioning. He had no choice but to place the seal there, however. That was the only place, apart from his heart, which he would not be placing any seals on, thank you very much, and throat, that he would guard diligently. The seal was triangular in shape with intricate lines and circles inside, stretching from the base of his skull to the top of his scapulas. He didn't have an official name for this creation of his, since he wasn't all too good at naming anything, but he called it the EBC seal, short for Energy Balance and Combine Seal. It was basically a seal that automatically stores, combines, and balances natural energy with his own chakra reserves upon activation. A replacement for one of his past life skill set. It allows for Madara to enter Sage mode whenever he desires. The only downside was that it takes up to 5 whole years for the natural energy to synchronize enough for him to use it without turning into a statue. Hence, it was more of a last-effort attempt at turning the tables or a limited power-up boost when he battles Dakizetsu, rather than something casual. The seal was also extremely dangerous. The only reason why Madara felt confident enough at having this EBC seal on his skin was because he knew how to properly employ it without turning to stone, what with having been a sage with the help of Hashirama's cells once upon a time. Furthermore, any damage on the seal, skin, could potentially bring harm to him once the Senjutsu chakra begins to leak out in dystopian spades. Ultimately, this seal was useless in the hands of both normal shinobi and Senjutsu practitioners. Madara didn't even bother to keep a hard copy of it, the soft copy already burnt into his mind's library thanks to his Sharingan's recall ability. Look at that. I'm actually glad you've picked up something else to enjoy without our prompting, Anija, even if it's to cover your whole body in ink. You've never actively shown interest in anything outside of training and knitting. And you avoid going outdoors in the daylight, which is why some of the kids call you a vampire, Izuna pointed out rudely, as if Madara was a reticent blood-drinking bastard who was also socially inept. He denies everything with crossed arms. Just because I do not broadcast my interests does not mean I have none other. I find crocheting to be just as alluring as knitting. That kinda makes no difference. Blasphemy, he sneered, do you not see and feel the differences in stitching techniques between your handmade scarves? No, Izuna deadpanned, and when Madara's lips parted to vocalize a passionate lecture about his side craft, Izuna quickly changed the topic. What's that on your forehead? His little brother blinked deviously innocent large eyes at him. His fingers automatically flew up to align his fringe as a curtain, but awkwardly fell back to his sides when he felt all of his hair already tied neatly behind his head. A rhombus, he snarked. Whilst not his own creation, Madara wasn't unashamed to say that he would, in a heartbeat, steal another person's signature jutsu if it would benefit him in the long run. The strength of 100 seal that Hashirama's granddaughter created was a masterpiece. Madara would be a fool to not utilize it to his convenience. Especially with his superb chakra control abilities despite his large reserves. Tsunade had proven how astonishing this jutsu was during the 4th Shinobi War. It also came with the bonus of shortening the lifespan of the user if used to heal fatal and extreme wounds. Perfect for someone who did not desire a long life. Although the shape did make him feel self-conscious enough to want to keep it hidden at all times. It reminded him too much of Mito. In spite of their similar design, however, he doubted hers functioned similar to his, or if hers were even a Seal Jutsu-based ink in the first place. It might just be for beauty purposes. Alright, whatever. I know when to take a hint, geez. Let's go to the onsen next. Maybe that can cure your eye bags even if slightly, Izuna grinned cheekily, always the tactful one between them both. Madara deadpanned. No. Why not? Izuna tugged on Madara's sleeve with a whine, eyes wide and shining with crocodile tears. Skinship is the key to making friends, Aniki. Madara, with a blank face, stood up from his cushion and briskly walked out of Izuna's bedchamber, dutifully turning a deaf ear to his brother's guilt trips. The brat had all but attached himself to Madara's thigh in his haste to act cute. Madara wasn't going to get tortured by his brother's attempts at making him more sociable. Brotherly bonding in private. Sure. Outings with strangers whilst naked. Fuck no. Without turning to look at Izuna, Madara drawled with noticeably twitching fingers, pawned. His baby brother promptly released him. A hush demonic carps are demonic leaving Izuna's lips as he bolted back into his bedchamber shoji doors, audibly sliding shut in his haste to be out of Madara's immediate vicinity. Madara idly wondered if he should pick some blueberries along the way for Tobirama the next time his schedule was open to visit their creek. Tobinai. Tobirama lifted his gaze from the book in his hands to Itama, his youngest brother, who was standing at the entrance of his room-turned-lab. He had sensed the other Senju standing outside his door long enough for it to be distracting, but due to Tobirama being an awkward teenager who was allergic to feelings in general, he waited for the dual-haired boy to reach out to him first. "Come in, Itama," he drawled, patiently waiting until his youngest brother had seated himself near him before he continued, "Is there something you need that requires my attention?" Itama fidgeted, biting his lower lip in nervousness. I would like to be a healer," was said in a whisper, cheeks flushed and radiating intense heat. Tobirama wondered if the boy had caught a fever, the sickness playing with his head. "That is a woman's job," he stated factually, but not unkindly. "Chichiyu would never approve." "Then help me convince Chichiyu." Itama latched almost desperately onto Tobirama's wrist, heterochromatic eyes pleading for his help. "Please, Tobinai. I think my talents lie in being a healer. My chakra reserves are the smallest in our family, and I have the necessary control, and if Taka can become a frontliner in our army despite being a girl, I can be a healer even if I'm a boy." Tobirama fell into a contemplative silence, his mind calculating the odds. Indeed, if Taka, a woman, frightening, powerful, and more masculine than even Hashirama, could raise through their ranks and become an elite warrior, what say Itama, soft, kind, and too gentle in nature to hurt others? Tobirama would feel more at ease if his youngest brother was kept out of the clan wars and brutal missions. Besides, it was true enough that Itama's chakra control was better than even Tobirama's, whose control was almost legendary within their clan despite his young age. "I am not opposed to the idea of you becoming a healer, Itama. However, it will take more than talent to have Chichiyu's blessing. We have a lot of planning to do." Itama beamed, tackled Tobirama into a hug, and giggled almost giddily. The older Senju could only stiffly pat the younger in the back, not knowing how else to react. If this was Hashirama, he would have just thrown his elder brother over his shoulder and be done with it. But with Kawurama and Itama, he felt uncomfortable to treat them with such obtuseness. Little brothers took delicate maneuvering and finesse, he had come to learn over the years, lest he be the one on the end of yet another prank of theirs, Kawurama, especially. The last time Tobirama had misjudged a situation and got involved, his hair had shined a putrid shade of neon green for a whole week. He was just glad that Madara had not had the time to visit the creek that month. Once more, Tobirama could not help but lament his awkwardness in human interaction and social cues. He took note to gather books and scrolls on human psychology the next time he leaves the compound for a mission. "Thank you, Nai-san. I knew I could always count on you. I love you, Tobirama Nai." Tobirama shrugged, cheeks slightly tinged in pink, and looked away. Such gratitude and love directed at him was yet another matter he was unused to. His father would only nod in acknowledgement whenever Tobirama handed a new jutsu he had created, whilst Hashirama and Kawurama took everything he did in stride. Sometimes the former would even compare him to their father, which made Tobirama look away for entirely different reasons he could not truly figure out. Only Itama would thank Tobirama and say "I love you" to him at random times. And it would always make his chest flutter, his blood race to his cheeks, and the need to look at anything but Itama more pronounced. Maybe this was why he was closest to Itama than any of his other family members. If the war lost him Atama, he knew he would do anything in his power to bring the gentle and kind boy back. He hid a shudder at the thought. Wanting to direct the conversation away from feelings, he stiffly questioned, "What made you choose to become a healer?" Much too alike to their eldest brother, Itama suddenly slumped, lips jutting out in a pout, a depressed air hung around him. Tobirama could only sigh at his brother's mood changes. Hopefully, Itama would grow out of it and not follow in Hashirama's footsteps. I was ambushed by the Fuma clan in my last mission. Tobirama immediately had his hands on Itama, physically checking for wounds and the likes, heart thudding wildly as fear washed over his person. When he found none, he cupped his youngest brother's cheeks, brows furrowed worriedly. Why was I not informed? It has been a week, Itama. You know that they coat their weapons in poison, precautions must be adhered. I met a brusque but kind healer during the snowstorm, Itama cut in hurriedly, face flushed with embarrassment and something else he did not recognize. He taught me the art of healing, while we waited for the storm to pass. Grumpily. He taught me grumpily. Very grumpily. It made Tobirama frown all the more, his thumbs circling idly over the colored cheeks. A man is a healer. Peculiar, but you should know better than to interact with other unknown shinobi, an ill-tempered one at that. He saved my life, Tobi Nai. An ulterior motive. I'm a nobody. You are not a nobody, Senju Itama. You're the clan head's son and my little brother. Arasan didn't know that. Arasan. A name made Tobirama stutter, fingers tightening their hold on his brother's face. When Itama made a small noise of distress, he quickly softens his grip and rubs apologetically. You know Dara-san, Nai-san. Itama titled his head to the side as he circled his small hands around Tobirama's wrists, his eyes eager as they shined brightly. Tobirama shifted uncomfortably in place, not knowing whether to deny such a thing or play ignorance. But he was curious if this person Itama was talking about was Tobirama's friend. The Uchiha did primarily introduce himself as Dara at the creek, after all. I may know of someone with that name. Can you describe his appearance? I think he has long hair, but it was in a messy top knot, so I'm not sure. But it's black in color. His eyes are equally black. He's very pale, too, and it seems to be his natural skin tone rather than sickness. He does have lines underneath his eyes quite deep, like he lacks sleep or is overly stressed. Arasan's body type is slender and looks about Hashi Nai or your age, Nai-san. He doesn't have any clan markings or a crest to indicate where he hailed from. Oh. And he also has a small violet diamond tattoo on the center of his forehead. His features are all sharp and pretty. Tobirama nodded, deep in thought as he tried to form the Dara-san Itama described into a picture in his mind. The image overlapped with a crassly smug Uchiha with messy and wild hair, and if Tobirama were to put his friend's hair into a top knot, it would be a near-perfect match. The only difference would be the tattoo and him being a healer. But Tobirama's ignorance of the former could be excused due to Madara's curtain of a bird's nest that covered 3/4 of the Uchiha's face. He was used to looking into Madara's left eye at all times, or rather, he has never once seen the Uchiha heir with both his eyes, thanks to the way the other shinobi styled his hair, or perhaps Madara simply didn't brush his hair and allowed for it to grow as wild as it wanted. As for the latter, all smart shinobi kept their skills to themselves. Tobirama himself didn't inform his family or Madara of his aptitude in Fuinjutsu. He was brought back to the present when he felt a finger poking his forehead. He slapped the annoying digit and scowled at the overly eager Itama, who was impatiently waiting for his answer. He sighed, fighting back the urge to roll his eyes. I may be familiar with the person you've described. Although not 100% certain as my Dara did not present to me his skills in healing. Nai-san, a simple yes or no, please, Itama whined. Yes, this time, he did roll his eyes skyward. Really before Tobirama could respond, Itama whooped and danced around his bedroom-turned-lab before he all but latched onto Tobirama's shoulders. Please, please, please tell me where I can find Dara-san. I want to learn more Iryojutsu from him. No. Itama reeled back, slumped to the ground, and hugged his knees to his chest, an air of depression, causing the air to grow heavy around him. I know he's pretty and you want to keep him to yourself, but that's unfair, Nai-san. Tobirama spluttered, cheeks staining red as he all but denied such a thing. Sure, Madara's features were not bad looking, and Tobirama wouldn't mind staring at the Uchiha for a long duration of time. No. He was not thinking about Madara, his first ever friend, being a potential life partner. Firstly, Madara was from the Uchiha clan. Secondly, the older shinobi was aggravating. Thirdly, the crass asshole treated him more like a younger brother than a potential lover. At the last thought, he pushed the dull aching in his chest into the deepest corner of his mind and took a deep breath to compose himself. No, as in his family background is complicated. You'll be taken out before you can reach his clan's compound. Then you must meet somewhere else that's safe, right? Itama suddenly pushed his face into Tobirama's personal space, their noses brushing. The albino narrowed his red eyes and leaned back as discreetly as possible. That's none of your business. Please. No. Pretty please with a cherry on top. No. What if I protect you from Kawarama's pranks in the future? Tempting, but still a no. Please, Tobi, I'll do anything. I'm leaving. In the end, during Tobirama's next visit to the creek, it was with a tag-along. Itama had promised to never tell anyone of their meeting. When Madara and Itama officially met, the latter all but tackled the former to the ground, which made Tobirama have a clear view of the violet diamond tattoo on the Uchiha's forehead. He dutifully ignored the ache in his chest when Madara fondly ruffled his youngest brother's hair and laughed when Itama's bubbly chatter became a spluttered mess, cheeks colored red as freshly plucked tomatoes. He looked away, staring blankly into the waters, not knowing what to make of the mess of swirling emotions he was currently experiencing. He decided not to think too much about it, lest he came up with an answer he disliked. It was only when Madara brushed gentle fingers against his bicep did he feel the tension in his muscles loosen. The Uchiha smirked, mouthing a challenge at him. Tobirama could only chuckle at the other's childishness, finally joining the dark-haired shinobi in teasing the embarrassed Itama by telling Madara about the youngest's childhood mishaps. Tobirama did his best to ignore the Uchiha bastard's blatant eyeballing as he performed his katas, a light sheen of sweat plastered on his skin as his muscles flexed and contracted with every movement he made. After another few more minutes, however, the Senju gave an aggravated huff, dropped his form, and swirled towards Madara with furrowed brows. What? He deadpanned. What? Was the half-hearted response from the still staring Madara. Tobirama was not impressed. For sage's sake, Madara. What do you want? You've been gawking at me for the past half an hour. I've not been, as you so eloquently put it, gawking at you, Senju. You're simply being egoistic and self-conscious. Please use that organ between your ears and remember that I am a censor. Tobirama stressed the last word as he crouched down to grab his canteen, and any shinobi worth their salt would be able to feel your eyes on them as soon as you've stopped blinking after the 5-minute mark and you're staring, Uchiha. So, spill. Or I'm leaving. I did not come here to be ogled at. Madara, although the Uchiha heir would never admit to it if it was pointed out, was openly pouting. Tobirama could feel his heart pounding faster for all the wrong reasons, and damn Madara and his good looks. And that meant nothing. Anybody would have their heart race if a beauty of Madara's standard were to show such an expression. I wasn't, Madara petulantly repeated, but when Tobirama pretended to leave, he quickly stood up from his seat on the boulder and crossed his arms. Okay, fine. I admit that I've been staring. There, happy. Ecstatic, Tobirama deadpanned, and why have you been staring? It's just that you're barefaced. The albino felt like Madara's voice was tinged with something akin to disturbed when he said the last word, causing Tobirama to inwardly gawk in confusion. Well, of course, his face was bared. He has no reason whatsoever to hide his identity with a mask, whilst with Madara. Outwardly, however, he rolled his eyes skyward. Your observation astounds me. It is no wonder they call you a genius. I meant your skin, idiot Senju. It's unblemished. Thank you. It wasn't a compliment. Then what is it? A complaint. About what? Your skin. And what's wrong with my skin, Uchiha? It's flawless. And what's wrong with that? Everything. Make some sense. I assure you there is no semblance of sense whatsoever in your words. But you're barefaced. Repeating yourself with the same words would not make my understanding of it better. Idiot Senju. Imbecilic Uchiha. Your brother's hair is stupid. Your hair is stupid. Madara has long thrown his arms in the air in sheer frustration, whilst Tobirama pinched the bridge of his nose for the very same reason. Sometimes, the Uchiha would say random things that made him look insane, whilst at other times, the messy-haired teen would speak of words that were full of wisdom. Madara always has a few odd moments, and this, the albino reckons, was definitely one of them. They traded childish insults until Madara had all but tackled him to the ground when he tried to walk away. Tobirama growled, elbowing the maddening Uchiha to try and dislodge the exasperating fool from his back. After what seems to be hours, but was in fact minutes, they both laid on their back, chest heaving as they stared at the clouds. Have you ever thought about getting inked, Tobirama? Madara turned his head to look at the albino, the unexpected question making Tobirama roll to his side with furrowed brows. He contemplated whilst staring into the Uchiha's black eyes. No. I see no purpose in making myself more identifiable than I already am. Would you consider inking a red line on each cheek and on your chin if I recommended? Tobirama's lips parted, a refusal on the tip of his tongue, but the words halted in their tracks at the expression on the Uchiha's face. Madara's eyes were soft, almost pleading when he asked his question. It was a vulnerability that Tobirama has seen only a handful of times. And at such a look, he simply could not refuse the Uchiha, no matter how insane his requests were. With a sigh, he reluctantly nodded. His agreement instantly made the Uchiha's lips curl upwards into an absolutely beautiful smile, and it made Tobirama's breath hitch, heart beating a mile a minute. He eagerly burned this into his memory, as he knew that Madara's genuine smile, not a smirk or a leer, was not one to be given so easily. He allowed it when Madara reached out to remove his Hapuri for him, the teen's fingers leaving a trail of heat on his otherwise icy skin. When the Uchiha happily brought out a kit of professional-looking needles, a variety of colorful ink pots and disinfectant, all the whilst smiling so radiantly, Tobirama felt that getting a few tattoos was worth it. Tobirama would do anything to see that smile playing on Madara's face. Anything that was within reason, of course. He wasn't dumb enough to be taken advantage of. Or, at least, that was what he repeated in his mind as his head was positioned to rest on Madara's lap, his neck bared and in a vulnerable position, as the latter carefully wielded a sharp needle that could puncture his carotid artery at any given moment. Tobirama's eyelids fluttered when his friend began inking 3 permanent marks on his alabaster pale skin. It felt like a claim of some sorts, he self-consciously thought, satisfaction thrumming through his veins. Seated straight back and in a seiza on his floor cushion next to Tajima, Madara showed no outward signs of his turmoil as the elders placed proposals after proposals atop the low table in front of them. His long mane helped to curtain most of his features, shadowing his expression as he silently observes the proceedings of their clan's monthly meetings. This month, the discussion was about his potential marriage partners as he was already of age to start his own family. In his first life, Madara had made a huge ruckus, all but denying them by spitting profanities, undiluted terror clouding his judgment, and he couldn't help but lash out. And to further nail his point, he went on unapproved solo missions that were borderline suicidal. It worked somewhat, as the council had dropped the matter in fear that he would perish during one of his reckless endeavor, which would then make the Uchiha lose their strongest warrior against the Senju. He had, however, not taken their stubborn pride into account until it was far too late to intervene. His little brother's happiness had been stolen by an arranged marriage with one of the elders' granddaughter. Up to his death, Madara could never forget the betrayal in Izuna's eyes as he sat with his soon-to-be wife and drank the ceremonial sake in Madara's place. But he was a coward, too engrossed in his own self-pity to own up to his mistakes. And that only made the guilt all the more heavier and unbearable. This time, however, Madara would be compliant, not wanting anyone to bear the consequences of his tantrums again. Madara's feelings held no significance, all that mattered was his little brother's happiness. He would wed whoever they wanted him to wed, but as soon as Tajima was dead, Madara would petition for an annulment. And as unlikely as it was for people of this time to agree to a divorce, Madara would prefer to start a family of his own choosing. A loveless marriage was a pointless marriage. Furthermore, he did not want the poor woman who was unlucky enough to be chosen as Madara's partner to be labeled as the wife of a madman and a tyrant. After all, at times, sacrifices must be made, and to bring an era of peace much earlier than his first life, Madara had already steeled himself to become the main villain of this story, and oh, how easy it was to fall back into old habits. He had already foreplanned how he would dictate the Uchiha clan as soon as he became its head, and admittingly, it would not paint a pretty picture. The resentment and terror his kin would undoubtedly feel towards him would forever haunt his nights, but if it was at the cost of cutting years of pointless fighting and deaths, he would make them believe that Madara was not a kind man. On Hagakure no Sato will be built ahead of its time if Madara has anything to say about it, fuck all those warmongers and vengeful ones. Anyone who opposed him would learn how unwise their decision was. And this was when the forbidden individual curse tag would come into play. Madara was not Hashirama, and nor was he Naruto. Violence and war were all he knew. And if he wanted to make a point, it would be with his gunbai and cursed seals rather than his words. He would be a leader who controls and dominates his people, a vile dictator, waiting patiently until someone decrins him forcefully. Then Hashirama would weep if he was here and had access to his innermost thoughts, and if Madara had not prepared his heart and mind from the get-go, he would have wept alongside his then best friend. Very well. It has been decided. My son and heir, Madara, will wed Akio Dono's granddaughter, Hikari-san. The ceremony will take place at the end of this week. I expect everything to be ready, prepared, and perfected by then. Understood, Tajima-sama. At Tajima's final say, the 5 elders bowed their heads in unison, their faces stoic yet their eyes gleeful. Their clan heir was strong and unbeatable despite only being 17 years old, and any child born from him, they rightfully assume, would be a powerhouse in the making. Madara, on the other hand, bent his head for an entirely different reason, lusterless eyes staring blankly at his lap. There were no outward tells of his inner bitterness or fear, only a stoic detachment in place. They believed he would accept anything they say, as his disposition was no different than usual. In their eyes, Madara has always been a tool that obeys all orders from his clan head and elders. He would not be breaking that image anytime soon. No, not yet, even if he desperately desires it. Ocarina-sai, and Ninja. Madara didn't turn to face Ryota, single-mindedly untying his sandals at the entryway. He did, however, try to make his voice as even as possible, not wanting to clue his little brother that he was feeling out of sorts. Tadaima Kurimashita, Ryota. Where are the rest of our brothers? Backyard. Zunin Ai is helping Taku and Yaku improve on their shuriken jutsu. How did the meeting go? His fingers trembled for a split second before he stubbornly clenched them into fists, glad that he was already seated since his knees were in a similar state. Taking a deep calming breath, he made sure to respond within the appropriate time gap. It went well. That's good to hear. Our honorable elders seemed to be in a terribly good mood when they left the shrine, so I had assumed the worst. I'm glad I was wrong. Does Inija want me to set up a bath? Please. Okay. When Ryota retreated to prepare a bath, the pitter-patter of feet gradually growing softer as he climbed the stairs, Madara covered his face with his palms and just breathed. He would be alright. Everything would be alright. Just because he would be a husband soon did not mean he was required to copulate. He was fine. Revolting, small calloused-covered hands slid across the expanse of his pale skin, leaving goosebumps in their trail as 11-year-old Madara growled in anger, his head throbbing from the lack of chakra in his system. Everything would work out in the end. There was no need to panic unnecessarily. The muffled screams he let loose went unheard, the gag preventing him from spewing profanities to cover up the fear that was clawing up his throat. He felt dirty. Why was she doing this to him? He didn't understand. Her touches were repulsive, yet his traitorous body enjoyed her caresses. He was a powerful shinobi now, not that naive and gullible child, haven't been so for a long time. What a beautiful boy you are, the brunette murmured, fingers pinching at his chest and making him arch with a mortifying sob. You'll come for me, won't you? You'll impregnate me, won't you? Such a good boy you are. The bath's ready, Inija, Ryota announced from the top of the stairs, his high-pitched voice bringing Madara back to the land of the living. I appreciate it, Ryota. Madara kissed his brother's forehead when he passed by, his mind already pushing all of those unpleasant memories to the back of his mind. It was not a healthy way to cope, but it was the easiest. When his engagement was announced later that night, only Takumi and Yukumi congratulated him as they were too young and did not know any better. He patted their heads, a bitter smile hidden behind his mantle's high collar. Izuna and Ryota clearly weren't happy with it, they believed in a loveful marriage, but they learned from Madara to keep their lips sealed and their heads down whenever they were in Tajima's presence, as rare as it was for the clan head to dine with them. Madara could only continue eating as if nothing was wrong, the mantra of everything would be okay still repeating in his head the entire time. Unexpectedly, he pondered what Tobirama would think of this arrangement and then he almost slapped himself for having such stupid thoughts. Why would Tobirama even care about the Uchiha clan's politics, anyway? Arranged and political marriages were common for clan heirs in this age. By the end of that week, Madara stiffly brought a cup of sake to his lips, lifeless eyes gazing at the face of his wife, who had her joyous face painted with thick powders of makeup and red lips that reminded him so much of his best friend's beautiful eyes. Idly, as Madara tipped his cup and swallowed the sake in one go, he wondered why his chest hurt all of a sudden. Madara gave a greeting smirk at his ever-scowling Senju from his seat on an outdoors picnic blanket, patiently waiting for the sullen albino to cross over to the Uchiha's side of the creek. The three, sharp and distinct red lines inked onto the Senju's alabaster complexion, caught the sun's rays, contrasting beautifully against pale skin and drawing Madara's piercing eyes to them. A small burst of laughter bubbled up his throat at the memory of how the younger shinobi had acquired them. It had been odd, seeing Tobirama without his trademark tattoos which made Tobirama over the years. Now, he could not even picture the younger shinobi without them. After that memorable event, Madara felt that they had somehow grown even closer. The Senju, after being acquainted with the devious hormones which made up puberty, had shot up like bamboo sprouts, easily overtaking Madara in height and muscle mass. The now 16-year-old impassive bastard had grown into a fine young man with broad shoulders, lithe body, and an almost unbreakable poker face. It made the smarters more than a little overbearing until Madara literally tore him a new hole during a spar. That had taught the cheeky brat to never again tease Madara about his shorter stature. It wasn't his fault that the majority of the Uchiha were late bloomers and that the Senju practically have the blood of giants in them. Furthermore, the younger shinobi has not only grown in body, but in mind as well. He had eased up considerably, was more confident and self-assured. No more thinking himself an emotionless perfect soldier for his father's use. Shinobi endure, yes, but they were only human, no matter how hard they try to expunge their emotions. Conceal? Yes. Erase? No. Even Madara could not completely remove his emotions, only compartmentalize. Madara worked extra hard in making sure to beat those stupid ideals out of that pretty little white head of his. He didn't need Tobirama influencing such ideas into Danzo's demented and crooked head, which would then tempt his future student into creating root, which would one day bring the end of the Uchiha clan. Every action and decision he made, as of late, felt as if there was an ulterior motive behind of them, his mind always weighing the cost versus benefits, responsibilities versus feelings. And sometimes, those measures made him distrustful over his own accomplishments, but that was just how he was, he supposes. It has always been easier for Madara to manipulate and strategize for an eventuality and plan for a contingency for his contingencies than to live life with irrational and reckless abandonment. "You look perkier than usual," Madara stated as soon as the Senju reached his side. The other paused, eyes slightly wide when he looked at Madara's hands. That made him tilt his head in askance, which the Senju blatantly ignored as he made to remove his fur collar. "Why hello Uchiha. Good afternoon to you as well. How was your day?" "Mine was shit. Thank you for asking," Tobirama drawled sarcastically, causing Madara's lips to quirk upwards in mirth. "Alright. I'll bite. What's got your panties in a twist? If there's a solution, I'll help straighten it out. For once in your life, Madara, could you not sound like such a juvenile scoundrel?" The albino scrunched up his nose before rubbing his temples tiredly. "Chichiyu has fallen ill, and the elders are pushing for me to lead the next raid. And Ninja is too soft, hence they are expecting that I be the one who assumed the mantle of general. Isn't that great news?" He patted the spot next to him as an invitation whilst rolling his eyes. "That Bitsuma is bedridden, I mean. Despite his lack of involvement in our upbringing, I do not wish ill upon him." "Stop bringing your daddy issues into my life," Tobirama bit back whilst he unstrapped his armor and settled next to Madara on the red outdoors blanket, their shoulders and knees pressed together due to the close proximity. The sudden warmth made a shiver run down his spine, causing him to nestle closer to the albino with a satisfying sigh leaving his lips. The weather has been getting colder as of late. And as distracted as he was, it took several long moments for Tobirama's words to register. When it did, however, Madara all but elbowed his friend in the ribs, a scowl on his features. "I do not have daddy issues." Madara all but shrieked, beyond offended. Spoken by someone who constantly plans patricide in his free time. "Why am I not convinced?" The albino sneered, gaze once again flicking distractedly to Madara's hands before resuming eye contact. "Bastard," he murmured weakly, not able to deny those accurate accusations. "So? Is he dying?" he asked with zeal. If Bitsuma was on his last breath, he could finally off his own father and send one of his personally trained messenger hawks with a missive, offering a ceasefire between their clans, the first step to building Konohagakure. It would be years early, but he had planned to have it that way, anyway, before any of their brothers' lives could be jeopardized. His friend, however, understood him well enough to look more exasperated than angered by his impolite question. Although that may be due to them being two peas in a pod. Misunderstandings between them were few and far between. "You are utterly shameless in your joy, Uchiha. Please refrain from showing how pleased you are at my clan head's dwindling health," he stated dryly, but Madara only continued to look eager. Tobirama sighed, deeming the Uchiha a lost cause. "It's still too early to tell, and while I try not to get sidetracked too often, you are distracting me, Dara. By not wearing your gloves. Why are you not wearing gloves? Are you doing this on purpose? Why do you sound so scandalized?" "Stop. They're just gloves, Tobira. It's hard to knit with them on, okay." Madara suddenly felt self-conscious, wishing he had not left his leather gloves back home. On the other hand, he made a mental note to always wear gloves whenever he plans to meet up with Tobirama. "We'll put the topic of you appearing highly indecent without them for another day, because I am seriously befuddled by what you are actually doing right now. Just what in Sage's name are you doing?" He sounded disturbed, an odd expression flickering on his face. Madara blinked uncomprehendingly. As he followed Tobirama's gaze, his eyes landed on the two thick senbon needles in his hands and the yarn wrapped around said senbon needles and his left index finger, connected to a ball of pastel blue yarn. "Use those organs in your sockets, Senju. Isn't it rather obvious? I'm knitting Yakumi a pair of woolen booties for the upcoming winter. And you a scarf for your birthday 3 months later." Oddly enough, his answer only made the Senju more baffled, the confused expression making him look younger. Madara huffed, yet again offended. Just because Madara only wore pre-owned clothing did not mean he would allow his younger brothers to do the same. What kind of neglectful older sibling did Tobirama think he to be? Who knows what sort of virus they could catch if they used clothing that was once worn by the dead. Besides, he became extremely proficient at knitting when he had been training Abido. The idiot would constantly burn all of Madara's mantles due to either a jutsu mishap or a training accident. He was, weirdly enough, incompetent in the art of shuriken jutsu and ninjutsu at the start of Madara's tutelage. Furthermore, after having his home invaded by his legally wedded wife, tension ran high in their household. Madara couldn't bring himself to unwind by knitting back in his bedchambers, seeing that it wasn't solely his anymore. He has been sleeping with either the twins or Ryota as of late. Even his siblings made themselves scarce by having daily outings to escape Hikari-sen's presence. "I can see that, Uchiha," the albino crossed his arms, "but I'm asking why. Why what? Why are you the heir, the one who knits their clothing? Do the Uchiha not have servants to do such chores for you? Or a tailor?" "Ah," Madara deadpanned, annoyed at being asked something so obvious. It should be evident by their lack of armor and scavenged weapons that the Uchiha were piss poor. Bitsuma had commented offhandedly as such a few years back, much to Tajima's fury and Madara's amusement. His father's pissed-off purplish face had made his day. Madara shrugged and went back to knitting. Technically no. Tajima is always too busy planning the next raid to build any form of rapport with our clients. Haven't been on any assassination missions as of late. They're my most profitable source of income. It's laughable, but the Uchiha are too poor to have servants. The civilians, however, help out in any way they can, simple chores such as community cooking, cleaning, and laundry. The services of tailors are too expensive for me to afford, and besides, I'd rather knit their clothes myself. That way, he could weave in a few protection seals with no one the wiser. I did not realize the difficult situation you are in. Madara, I apologize if I have offended you with such questions. He waved the apology off without looking up from his work, a chuckle escaping his lips. You need not worry about offending me, Snowflake. I know your curiosity all too well. He idly laid his head on Tobirama's shoulder as he continued to lean heavily against the Senju's side, Dexter's fingers moving with fierce precision. Being broke has its upsides. Knitting helps me to unwind. Izuna, too, enjoys going out on hunts. He would bring back his game and contribute them to our kin who are widowed or orphaned, whilst leaving enough for our family. Ryota loves experimenting and creating new recipes, especially whenever Izuna catches something odd. Madara made a complicated face at that, remembering those times when Izuna had brought back exotic animals for dinner. One fine example was the tarantula sliders. Ryota had managed to trick them into eating those vile things without their knowledge up until the very end. Until now, the memory still brought a shudder of revulsion down his spine. Tobirama made an amused sound at his visible reaction, pale and slender digits rubbing circles on Madara's thigh in a soothing rhythm. He huffed, playfully headbutting the albino's chin before settling back to continue his knitting. Ikumi adores the performing arts. Although his lessons do require finesse that I could only gain whenever I go out on missions and copy them with my Sharingan. I suspect that he'd rather be a civilian than a shinobi, to be honest. I mind not, but Tajima, on the other hand, HMPH. As for Takumi, he's still searching for his calling, but I reckon he's leaning towards being an artisan whenever he's not training. He enjoys painting and crafting far too much to find a new hobby, says it's calming. They sound like nice kids, Tobirama says with rare softness. They are, a happy smile was playing on his lips when he readily agrees. His younger brothers were godsend. Without them, Madara wouldn't know what else he could have done but train and train and train, honing his already deadly set of skills for nothing but his ambition. Madara suddenly recalls possessing a container full of blueberry tarts, the ones Ryota had made just earlier today, sneakily, as Hikari-sen had taken over their kitchen, much to the four brothers' misery. Ryota's cooking was to die for. He deftly pulls it out and dangles it in front of the Senju's face. Blueberry tarts, Senju. Tobirama had already snatched the container before Madara could finish asking. You should have offered sooner, Uchiha, the Senju grouched, already munching happily on the desserts, eyes squinted in pleasure. What a child. Oh, right. I was going to ask, but I got sidetracked. What happened to your hand? Madara, with a distracted air, tucked the curtains he calls his fringe behind an ear and leaned closer to get a better look. 3 of Tobirama's right fingers were in splints and his wrist wrapped, obviously broken. He idly wondered if it was from a sparring accident or a mission gone wrong. Tobirama gazed at him for a few long moments, obviously debating whether to answer truthfully or not. It made Madara unhappy, put off that the albino would keep secrets from him, and yes, he knew he was being irrational and hypocritic. He, too, kept many secrets. Thus he jeered, what? Does the little baby Senju want this big bad Uchiha to heal his boo-boo for him or not? The teen huffed, turning away with lips pursed in displeasure. Disciplinary measures, apparently. What does that even mean? He mused out loud, a bad feeling building up in his throat. It means shut up and let me eat in peace. Grumpy. Why hadn't you allowed Tama-chan to heal it? He's currently out on a mission with Kawurama and Tauka. HN. Rolling his eyes upwards, he snatched the stubborn idiot's injured hand and healed it within moments. Soon enough, they fell into a companionable silence, with Tobirama's munching heard once in a while. Madara went back to his knitting whilst Tobirama simply laid next to him, head in Madara's lap and enjoying the snack. They were both content with sunbathing in this cooling weather, perfect for people like them who have sensitive skin who don't tan but scorch in the sun. Afternoons like these was his favorite. It made Madara forget that he was a tool, a weapon bred for war. Smiling with a mixture of pride and bitterness at the sudden reminder, his fingers paused as he spoke tentatively, perhaps a dance after your snack. HN, Tobitama grunted, cheeks bulging like a chipmunk's. Excellent. We don't want you growing fat now, do we? Madara teased, resulting in a deadly glare from the albino. If looks could kill, Madara would already be dead 1,000 times over. Thanks, Sage. Tobirama was not an Uchiha. With a laugh, he used a finger to playfully poke at one bulging cheek. It made a pinkish hue appear on the Senju's face Madara assumes was due to embarrassment, and he patted his friend's snowy white hair in a mocking manner. Tobirama made an adorable whining sound, which would be later denied by the albino, whilst burrowing his heated face into Madara's stomach, as if that could hide him from any more of Madara's teasing. What a cute brat, Madara inwardly cooed, his fingers not once stopping in their activity of caressing those soft white locks. Hashirama hummed softly under his breath as he strolled through the streets of Soraku. So, why was Hashirama here? Well, word has it that there have been sightings of the Uchiha clan in this seemingly abandoned city, and while usually, Tobes would be the one who takes on these types of missions, Takeshi-san, his father's right hand, had gotten word that Uchiha Madara had been spotted at this exact location not a day ago. And as Hashirama was the only one who could openly fight against the Uchiha heir without losing his life, he and Kawurama had been selected for this intel gathering mission. As for why Kawa was paired with him, it was due to his little brother's proficiency in disguises. While Kawa hid at the outskirts of the city, ready to provide backup if required, Hashirama strode confidently around with his hair dyed black and facial structure reconstructed with makeup and clay to look more like an Uchiha. After a few days of spying on and chatting with the residents here, Hashirama figured out that Soraku was basically a den filled with black marketeers. They sold their wares to anybody without caring about affiliation, clan, and status. It was no wonder the Uchiha would buy and store their munitions here. Although he knew that the Uchiha heir was spotted here yesterday, it was still somewhat of a surprise when he stumbled across Uchiha Madara, paying for one of them illegal rare goods. The Uchiha heir looked unfazed at being caught by a clan member, only gazing at Hashirama's disguised form for a split second before returning to his transaction. Before Hashirama could bolt, however, the Uchiha gestured for him to stay put. As much of a loudmouth Hashirama was, he was first and foremost a shinobi, and as a shinobi, he knew how covert missions went. So not wanting to clue Uchiha Madara that he was an infiltrator, he obediently accepted the order. As he waited for the Uchiha to complete his transaction, he decided to scrutinize the other shinobi. Whenever they met in combat, Hashirama didn't have the leisure time required to study the Uchiha despite their close proximity. That was how challenging, dangerous Uchiha Madara was in a fight. Uchiha, as per usual, was wearing an indigo mantle with sleeves that flow past his fingertips, standard shinobi pants and sandals, and if Hashirama could see the man's hands, probably a pair of leather gloves as well. If Hashirama did not know any better, he would think the Uchiha skin shy. But, of course, he knew better. He had seen the man run around the battlefield with holes and cuts in his clothes as they fought, looking pretty much like a war god with flames and explosion, whipping his long hair in the wind. Hashirama has never, however, once seen the right side of the Uchiha's face, thanks to the sheer volume of his hair, but he knew that Uchiha was quite handsome just from what he could see. Although, in Hashirama's humble opinion, he still looked much like a porcupine with his hair spiking everywhere like that. Name? Uchiha Madara asked with disinterest after the seller had left them, turning fully to face Hashirama. Sweating at the unexpected inquiry, he blurted out the first name he could think of. Ashi, and oh, how he could picture Tobe's pinched expression right now, followed by the tirade about the benefits of pre-planning. My name is Hashi, Madara-sama. The Uchiha heir only HN'd, obsidian eyes narrowed and for a second there, Hashirama was concerned that he had been exposed, but Uchiha only turned on his heels, throwing a curt, walk with me, over his shoulder. Hashirama scrambled to follow. Quite unexpectedly, Uchiha led them to an eatery. The Uchiha then chose a table that allowed them to have a full view of the restaurant where they could see the comings and goings of the customers, as well as to have easy access to one of the exits if called for it. This was a seat he knew Tobes would appreciate. When a waitress came bounding over, Hashirama panicked for a moment, not knowing if the Uchiha clan came here frequently or if this was the first time. He praised that it would be the latter, since if it was the former, he would be expected to know the menu. When the waitress bowed low to them, however, a respectful Uchiha-sama leaving her lips, Hashirama knew that he was screwed. Before he could make a fool of himself, the Uchiha heir thankfully ordered for them. Hashirama didn't exactly pay much attention to what they were getting, more concerned with keeping his cover. How do the Uchiha clan members act when they were with their clan's heir in a private setting, anyway? Would they joke around like the Senjus? Or would they remain stiff and formal? Oh, darn. Takeshi-san should have picked Tobes for this mission. Hashirama was not the best choice for missions that require him to act like someone else. What is it? Hashirama couldn't withhold a flinch when the other shinobi questioned him in complete monotone. Having just noticed that he had been blatantly staring at Uchiha for far too long, he threw a nervous glance at the porcupine ahem, Uchiha before looking away. Taking a deep calming breath to try and relax as much as possible, he responded with as much stoicism as he could muster, which was not a lot. Ah, nothing. I was just wondering why Madara-sama is here in Soraku, better to try and get as much information as possible before he got found out, right? Pulling the wool over Uchiha's eyes seemed virtually impossible, but he would do his best. Madara, the Uchiha suddenly stated, just Madara. You do not need to add Sama behind my name, Hashi. Blinking at the remark, Hashirama abruptly beamed. The Uchiha heir must have a good relationship with his clanmates to allow them to call him by just his name. If any of the Senju were to do that, not that Hashirama minded, actually, his father would have their head. Okay, Madara. He didn't know if it was just his eyes playing tricks on him, but he swore that the Uchiha had softened considerably at being called informally. Before he could think more on that, their food arrived. Hashirama was instantly distracted, his drool accumulating in his mouth at the sight of a bowl of mushroom mixed soup. It has been a while since he had eaten his favorite meal. Within moments, he had finished the bowl, satisfaction curling in his stomach. Before he could be disappointed that was all, a leathered hand pushed another bowl of mushroom mixed soup in front of him. He peered at Uchi Madara, unsure if he should eat it or return it to remain polite. Eat, Hashi. More will come soon. Not one to usually hesitate when it came to food, Hashirama grinned gratefully and proceeded to eat with gusto. His appetite was gigantic and a bowl would simply not fill him. It was only when he reached his fifth bowl did he notice that Madara has not once removed his gaze on him as he continues to sip his tea, obsidian eye crinkled in what he recognizes as fondness. Hashirama was a master in emotions, so he wouldn't have mistaken that look. But they have just met, so why would Madara give him such a look? Why would Madara feel a fondness for Hashi? Madara? He blinked, tilting his head slightly to the side to try and figure the mysterious Uchiha out. His lips parted, ready to ask what was on his mind, before abruptly remembering that he was on a mission. He snapped his mouth shut, awkwardly flailing as he tried to think of something to say. When a minute passed by in silence, it was Madara who spoke. Have you been well? Eh? I'll take that as a yes, Madara chuckled. It was a nice sound. The man should laugh more often. In his days, he didn't realize he had spoken such words out loud. The Uchiha's pale skin flushed pink as he looked away, murmuring something about filters and bumbling idiots. That snapped Hashirama out of his stupor, a sheepish smile playing on his lips as he scratched the back of his head. You remind me of Tob, one of my little brothers, was not what he had intended to say, but somehow, Madara made him relax his guard enough to talk about his family. Do I now? The Uchiha responded, a playful glint sparkling in his visible eye. Well, you remind me much of my baby brothers. They're twins. Oh? He leaned forward on his elbows, interested in getting to know the man's family. Not because Hashirama wanted to use his family against him, but because he wanted to know Uchiha Madara more outside of combat. The best way to know someone was to have a conversation about their loved ones. And they're 7 years old. That made Hashirama sputter, squawking in mock offense when he realized that he was being called a man-child. Truly, Madara was almost cut from the same cloth as Tobes. I'm not a kid, Madara, he whined. Are you sure? You're sounding like one. So Crul, you're just like Tobes, always making fun of me, he pouted, crossing his arms over his chest. I shouldn't ever let you both meet. It'll be the end of me then. I wish you the best of luck in that. Somehow, he felt that there was an inside joke there, but he just couldn't figure it out. They continued to converse for hours, and by the end of the day, Hashirama felt that he could call Madara his friend. They've talked about their families, the activities they do when out of battle. Nobody would ever believe him if he told them that Uchiha Madara knits in his free time, their likes and dislikes, and their dreams of peace. It was a shocking and pleasant surprise to hear that Madara was simply waiting for an opportunity to achieve his dream. Hashirama wished he could just tell Madara about how he would be the Senju head soon, his father was growing weaker by the day, and that he would be thrilled to have an alliance with the Uchiha. Unfortunately, he knew that now was not the right time. As they stood side by side at the edge of Soraku, saying their goodbyes, Hashirama finally couldn't help it. He gathered the flailing Uchiha into a bear hug, fighting to keep the tears from leaking out of his eyes. It's not as if we won't see each other again, Hashi, Madara groaned breathlessly as he awkwardly patted the brunete's back. That only made him squeeze harder, causing the Uchiha to grunt about the lack of oxygen. After all, he couldn't actually tell Madara that he wasn't an Uchiha, and that after he completes his mission, they would not see each other back at the man's compound. I'll see you around, Madara, Hashirama finally let go, grinning at the shorter man with tears in his eyes. Of course you will, the Uchiha grumbled, rolling his eyes upwards. Again, his fondly exasperated behavior reminded him sorely of Tobes. It only made his grin stretch wider. One day, he would officially introduce his little brothers to this man. Uchiha Madara was gentle and kind outside of combat, and he wishes for others to see that as well. As he swirled on his heels, knowing that Madara would not attack Hashi even if he turned his back on him, he gathered chakra into his legs and prepared to leap onto the trees. Before he could, however, Madara spoke words that made him trip over himself. Your physical disguise might be flawless, Senju Hashirama, but you should work more on scrambling your chakra signature. Tobirama, I reckon, could help you with that. Just as he turned to face Madara, his mouth parted in the shape of an O, he saw the Uchiha's silhouette disappear between the houses, having retreated back into Soraku. He debated with himself if he should chase after the Uchiha, but after a few moments of pondering, though better of it. From what he knew, Uchiha Madara was a censor, not as amazing as his little brother Tobes, of course, but still skilled. So even if Hashirama gave chase, the Uchiha would not be found if he did not wish for it. With a sigh, he headed towards Kawa and his campsite, a small smile refusing to leave his lips. Hashirama can't wait until he and Madara become heads of their respective clans. The future has never seemed this promising before. Madara blinked before bending his neck marginally to look downwards at the two touches of warmth that had crashed and was now latched onto his thighs, bunching the fabric in their small fists. The two small children, only 7 this year, grinned at him mischievously, their dimples making them appear twice as adorable. The corner of his eyes crinkled with fondness as he smiled gently at his two baby brothers. "Why hello there, sweetie, sweetheart," he greeted Takumi and Yukumi respectively, keeping his tone soft and tender. "What are you both doing out here all on your lonesomes?" Looking at the pretty birdies. The twins chirped in unison. Are my two darling angels taking interest in falconry? Yukumi and Takumi cutely bobbed their head, hands behind their backs and feet shuffling with too much contained energy. "Will Aniyu teach us how to care for the pretty birdies?" Of course, Madara crouched to their height and brought the Ayas that was sitting obediently on his gloved fingers in front of two pairs of wide, interested eyes. "This is Tobo. Would the two of you like to pet him? You'll have to be really gentle, though he's still a baby." "Younger than us?" Takumi asked. "Younger than even you, sweetie," Madara nodded. "He's so pretty," Yukumi cooed, a pudgy finger clumsily but gently stroking the bird of prey's breast. "And soft." Takumi chimed not a second later. "Indeed. He's a very special red-tail hawk. Do you know what albinism is, sweetie, sweetheart?" Takumi and Yukumi both shook their heads, eyes full of curiosity and the desire to learn. Madara chuckled, patting his baby brother's soft, silky strands while simultaneously keeping an eye on his beloved hawk. The Ayas was still young, and as Madara was still in the midst of training it, it was unused to other humans. Therefore, there still existed a slim chance of them being pecked at. Especially by this particular one. An albino is someone who lacks pigment color in their skin, hair, and eyes. Tobo lacks coloring in all of his feathers, except for this part of his tail here. See? Madara rotates his wrist to display a small section of the bird's tail feathers. It's red. Like the Sharingan. Yukumi squeaked in excitement, jumping up and down with his hands clasped on his chest. "A Sharingan, Perhaps, sweetheart, perhaps." The elder Uchiha hid a secretive smile behind his mantle's high collar. "His eyes do appear to be a similar shade," was mumbled out almost inaudibly. "Tobo's eyes don't look red, Aniyu," Takumi pointed out innocently, causing Madara to flush at having his musings be heard. "Ah, yes. You're right, sweetie. How silly of me. Do you want to try holding him?" Aniyu will let Takumi hold him. "What about Yukumi?" "Absolutely. Wait for me here. Ani-san has to get smaller gloves for both of you to wear." Madara's slip of the tongue was all but forgotten at the prospect of holding a bird of prey. Thank the sage for children and their short attention span. When he came back with a pair of kitty gloves, he helped Yukumi and Takumi both equip them properly before whistling sharply twice. Tobo and his nestmate, Turyu, swooped down and landed with practiced ease on Yukumi and Takumi's fingers respectively, causing the children to let out exclamations of delight and awe. Madara smirked in pride whilst giving the two Ayases treats for obeying his command. Turyu chirped, sharp beak playfully nipping at Madara's gloved fingers in a show of affection. Takumi looked shocked and scared at first, but at Madara's serene expression, gave into curiosity and fearlessly, stupidly, placed a digit in front of the hawk's beak, his twin recklessly doing the same. Whilst Turyu obediently and cheerfully nipped with playfulness, Tobo's eyes were frosty, similar to its namesake, but under Madara's dominative and penetrative gaze, it nipped Yukumi's finger with as much gentleness as a bird of prey could muster. Their actions made Yukumi and Takumi both giggle, their grin stretching from ear to ear. "I want my own birdie too, Aniyu," Yukumi childishly demanded, pleading puppy dog eyes aimed at Madara's direction. "Me too, Aniyu," Takumi asserted not a second later, his lower lip jutting out into a cutesy pout. "Anything you want, sweetheart, sweetie," Madara folded to their peremptory request like wet toilet paper. If any of his enemies could see him now, they would undoubtedly be putting their hands together and forming the seal required to dispel illusions. "Which type of hawks are you interested in?" It was rather obvious that they were both manipulating him to make him agree with their demands by acting cute, but he cared not about the not-so-discreet attempt. In fact, he even felt pride in their trickster ways. Whenever they turned their cutesy act on him, he would always melt into a puddle of goo. Perhaps there was a pit in his brain somewhere when it came down to his two adorable baby brothers. "We don't know," the two younger Uchiha shrugged. "Well, no worries. We can take a look at all my hawks and see which one you would like, okay, my dears. I want a baby birdie. I want a baby birdie too. Alright. Aniu is the best. They trilled with wide, innocent eyes. If Yukumi and Takumi say so, then I must be. Madara smiled in a dopey manner and discreetly puffed out his chest at the praise, similar to the birds he usually trains. Turyu seemed confused but followed Madara in puffing its chest out as well. Tobo, on the other hand, would have rolled its eyes if it was able to, its owner was such an amenable broken. The three Uchiha brothers were relaxing on the grassy ground. Madara was content with watching his mini raptors zooming across the sky with Takumi cuddled atop his abdomen, the child's own egg cupped delicately in small hands, and Yukumi snuggled to his right. Hurry up and be born, okay? Yukumi whispered encouragingly as he bunched some of Madara's long, wild hair around his egg. Madara only huffed out a breathy laugh, not minding that his younger brother was using his mane as a makeshift bird nest. It already looked like one, anyway. Remember what I told the both of you? They responded enthusiastically, repeating what he told them not too long ago, keep them warm inside their nest and be very gentle whenever touching and/or petting them. But boys, Madara murmured, brushing his lips against Yukumi and Takumi's temples in a gesture of affection. You're spoiling our baby brothers rotten, Aniki. The twins flinched at Izuna's sudden arrival, whilst Madara only gave his first little brother a look, having long sensed Izuna's chakra signature approach them. Iwa, the meanie is here. Aniu, defend us from the baddie. Takumi's lips wobbled into a rather convincing teary expression, but Izuna only raised a condescending brow and crossed his arms, unimpressed by the boy's theatrics. Don't worry, Taku, remember our secret weapon out of nowhere, and much to Madara's startled amusement, Yukumi pulled out a pouch of salt and began flinging handfuls of the seasoning at the sputtering Izuna, evil spirit begging. What the actual fuck? You actually dare to throw salt at me? I'll make the both of you become evil spirits, you spoiled beasts. Knowing that Izuna's relationship with the twins was akin to a bully and its victims, the twins being the bullies and Izuna the poor victim, Madara swiftly kept the eggs inside his sleeves for safekeeping, unsealed a plate of steamed corns, and settled into a comfortable position to enjoy the show. We must retreat, Taku, for the evil spirit is too evil to be purified. Yukumi threw the whole pouch at Izuna as a form of distraction, whilst yelling out to retreat, a serious expression on his cherubic features as he pulled Takumi into a mad dash towards the house. The attack only manages to make Izuna wheeze out a series of coughs for a second or two before he swipes a sleeve, rather dramatically in Madara's opinion, across the air in a slashing gesture to disperse the cloud of salt. Scowling at the twins' back as they fled, Izuna reaches into his left sleeve and flung out 4 soft beads at them in one go. The beads made the twins' faces be acquainted with the ground when they accurately hit the back of their knees. Whilst they simultaneously groaned in despair at their foiled attempt of escaping, Izuna appeared in front of them with crossed arms, smiling smugly. TSK, TSK, TSK. I am so gonna teach you 2 limp noodles a lesson for the shit you just pulled on me. The twins squealed when they were lifted by the collars of their mantles and spun in wide circles. It might look rough to bystanders, but Madara's keen eyes picked that Izuna's hold and movements were gentle, more to get their adrenaline pumping than to hurt them. Hey YAA, save us from Izuoni, Aniu. They giggled, kicking their short legs out to try and get Izuna in the chin. That only resulted in them being flung high up into the air, making them screech in joy when they were caught and juggled by their second oldest brother. Madara let out a huff of laughter as his 3 little brothers continued to play. He sat up with crossed legs, not minding that Tobo's and Turyu's talons were digging into his shoulders when they perched on him not a second later. Once in a while, he would feed the 2 Aeses whenever they eyed the corn in his hands long enough for Madara to feel fond exasperation. How energetic. He turned to Ryauta, who has just settled himself to Madara's right and snuggled into his side almost immediately. He brought a hand to rest on his little brother's head, ruffling the younger's hair and smiling when Ryauta did nothing but beam up at him. Why don't you join them, Ryauta? I'd rather not be manhandled by the brute. Ryauta gave a pointed look at Izuna, who was currently bench pressing their baby brothers without any visible effort on his part, and I prefer Anija's company over the little demons any day. I don't understand why you and Izuna would always call them such names, Madara lamented. Ryauta gave Madara a look so dry he was tempted to offer his brother eye drops. That was probably learned through observing Madara give them to Izuna one too many times. Because they're rightful little demons, Anija. Don't be tricked by their cutesy act, they're only nice when you're around. They're angels. They've pulled wool over your eyes. I'm afraid you're beyond saving, Anija. You have my condolences. Madara made a half-hearted sound of protest whilst deciding to continue his ignorant act. He, of course, knew that the twins were rightful menaces to Izuna and Ryauta whenever Madara faded into the background. What sort of older brother would he be if he did not amuse himself with his little brother's suffering? It was only fair after he had changed their smelly diapers and had his hair and fingers munched on when they were still babies. The only unfortunate matter was that there were no convenient cameras in this time period and he could not take evidence of their foolish younger selves as blackmail material for the future. Thobo and Turyu suddenly took off into the skies, some of their feathers landing in Madara's hair. "Please pardon my intrusion, Madara-sama, Ryota-sama." Madara's expression had long returned to its passive state when he sensed her approach. Ryota, on the other hand, couldn't hide how his muscles had tensed when Hikari-san spoke from next to them, probably startled as he was too distracted by their conversation. He didn't blame his little brother for his inattentiveness, seeing that the younger had felt safe enough with Madara close by to drop his guard and that civilians' chakra signatures were hard to detect by a shinobi who was not trained in sensing. But he still took note to double Ryota's awareness exercises from now on. "Hikari-san," he greeted politely but monotonously, discreetly pushing Ryota aside so that he was able to stand next to his wife, blocking his brother from her sight. He disliked having someone unfamiliar so close to his precious people despite her lack of kunoichi training. "What brings you here?" "I've come to inform Madara-sama and his brothers that lunch has been prepared." Her head was bowed slightly in a show of respect whilst her hands were intertwined in front of her. "We will be there shortly," Madara answered stiffly, more of a dismissal than a response. "Understood. I know to not question Madara-sama unnecessarily as he is a busy man, but to prepare myself, may I know if Madara-sama will be returning to our bedroom tonight?" Madara was instantly uncomfortable with such a question being thrown at him in front of his little brother. After their wedding day, which was a year ago, Madara had not once entered his bedchamber, always making excuses about preparing for a mission, even though he would sleep in the twins' or Ryota's room afterwards. He knew it was cowardly of him to treat her as such, she was an innocent party, but Madara couldn't help it. Cold sweat would cover him from head to toe whenever he pictures them and a Futon together, paranoia causing him to flee make a tactical retreat. His brothers might not mind him intruding upon them, in fact, Izuna and Ryota actually encourage Madara to retreat to their rooms after dinner each night, but he knows that Tajima has been asking Hikari-san whether she was pregnant yet with his child. And the pressure of their clan head was what made her question him subtly whenever she sees him. He did not blame her. Tajima was intimidating to many as he was a violent man prone to striking first, talk never. Under his billowing sleeves and out of sight from prying eyes, Madara balled his gloved fists. It was not that Madara was purposefully being difficult, he was just uneasy at the prospect of being intimately touched. After having been violated by a bloodline thief back when he was truly an 11-year-old child, he has never once engaged someone in an act of coitus. He has never known the taste of carnal pleasure up till the day he exhaled his last breath next to then Hashirama. Even after having returned to his second childhood, this current body of his has yet to be touched, and he intended to keep it that way till his fourth and final death. He wore gloves for a reason, for fuck's sake. It was not a fashion statement as he was not a vain man. Hence, to be expected to impregnate someone after such a traumatizing event was he just couldn't do it, no matter how much he forces himself to compartmentalize and think this as one of his long-term infiltration/honeypot missions. My apologies for stealing Madara Ani again for tonight, Hikari-san. A ninja has promised to help me improve in my calligraphy after dinner. Ryota, the ever-perceptive teen that he was, inserted himself into the conversation before Madara's silence got too long. When Hikari-san looked as if she wanted to say something else, Izuna arrived in a timely manner with the twins in tow to loudly exclaim that the brats were hungry and that they should go have lunch now. Hikari-san's lips pursed for a split second in displeasure, but she bowed and retreated back into the house obediently just like how she was taught to obey the orders of her husband and his immediate family members. As soon as she was out of sight, Ryota pulled him into a hug, comforting words being whispered soothingly into his ears. Ryota's fingers were combing through his long hair, gentle, calming, and purely platonic motions that prevented him from lashing out at their intimate proximity. He only just realized that he was trembling bodily when he brought his arms up to return the favor, so he exhaled shakily and forced himself to relax into his younger brother's embrace. "Aniki, do you want me to sanction a month-long mission for you?" Izuna murmured softly, calloused-covered hands rubbing soothing circles on Madara's back. "Please," he whispered, burrowing his face deeper into Ryota's shoulder to hide his shame. "Alright. I'll bring the twins inside and distract Hikari-san. Just take as much time as you need, Aniki. Don't force yourself, okay? We understand." Madara didn't know why he felt like such a failure, as a man and as a big brother, when Izuna mentions that they understood why he reacted so negatively to something as simple as sex. The full moon tonight, he assumes, would probably be twice as red than any other lunation. Without having to look up from his work, Tobirama already knew that it was Hashirama who had boisterously slammed open the shoji door leading into his office. After all, the taller Senju was always loud in announcing his presence. Furthermore, the Senju heir's massive chakra wasn't at all subtle for a sensor of Tobirama's caliber. "Tobirama, let's go swimming together." Hashirama glumped the albino from behind, and even without turning to face the other, Tobirama could tell from just Hashirama's tone alone that the latter was grinning expectantly. Tobirama's expression was stone cold as he took a deep breath in and out. In and out, then he bluntly ignored the unwelcome visitor and continued to calculate his clan's total income earned from missions. He had only recently implemented a scheme and was now eager to see if it had brought out the expected results. Whether it had increased their revenue with minimal casualties or was it a total failure. His goal, after all, was to minimalize the mortality rate by ranking a shinobi's skill set and matching it to a corresponding mission. There was also the need to have a decrease in expenditure due to the ongoing shinobi clan wars. Tobirama. With practiced ease, he turned a blind eye to his brother, who was still hugging him like a koala, and leaned closer to the papers with squinted eyes. His eyesight was becoming worse from all the paperwork he was doing, and as an albino, his eyes were already shite to begin with. It seems that he would need to ask Madara to correct his eyesight again. That was not something he was looking forward to. Don't ignore me, Tobi. Idly, Tobirama wondered how Madara was doing. Madara seemed restless when he saw the older shinobi during a skirmish a few days back. It was unlike the Uchiha heir to be so distracted while fighting against Hashirama, and within the safety of his head, Tobirama felt worried for him. He knew how stubborn Madara was about his own health and safety. He would push and push and push until his body could take the abuse no longer and shut itself down. It had happened before, back-to-back missions for months without rest until one day, Madara just collapsed and fell into a deep coma that lasted for a chilling 3 weeks while they were both having their monthly sparring sessions at the creek. Tobirama had freaked the fuck out, his mind was completely empty from the sheer panic he felt. Without thought, he, stupidly, rushed to sneak the Uchiha into the Senju compound just because he trusted no other medic nin but Itama to tell him what was wrong with his friend. Madara had, after all, thoroughly trained Itama into becoming one of the best, if not the best, medic nin in Hai no Kuni. And Tobirama was damn proud of his baby brother's achievement and reputation. But anyway, he hadn't been thinking straight back then about the consequences it would bring when he lugged an unconscious Uchiha heir into his home. Thankfully, the majority of the Senju militia, the elites of their clan, were off fighting against the Hyuga that day. If not, Tobirama and Itama would have undoubtedly been branded traitors that day if they had been found. Tobi. As soon as he registers his brother calling him by that wretched childhood nickname of his, Tobirama threw the brush in his hand at Hashirama, feeling intense satisfaction when the Neanderthal squawked in protest when the item struck him in between the eyes. Straddling his chair, he faced his obnoxious older brother. What? He bit out without a change of expression. Let's go swimming together, Tobi. I'm bored, Hashirama whined, arms flailing in the air as he threw a massive tantrum that would make even toddlers jealous on the floor. Why should I care if you're bored, Anija? And don't call me that. Tobirama was never fond of diminutives, especially when used on his name. But Tobi is Tobi, was the petulant response to his reprimand. No, Anija. Just no. Pinching the bridge of his nose as if to ward off a headache, Tobirama exhaled while counting backwards from 10. Where were Itama and Kawurama when he needed them the most? He did not wish to be in Hashirama's vicinity when the older Senju was bored enough to whine. What about Tobira then? Before Hashirama could even finish that sentence, Tobirama's utterly murderous glare cut him off. Brother or not, there was only one person he would allow to call him that. And Hashirama was not him. Okay? I can see that that is forbidden. You don't have to glare at me like that, Tobirama. I just want to spend time with you, my precious little brother, Yen. Tobirama forcefully rolled his shoulders to lessen the tension when Hashirama drooped, a depressing cloud appearing above his head. He rubbed a palm against his face to delay a response. It had been ill-conceived of him to lash out just because of that. Especially when Anija actually appeared hurt by his unconscious reaction to being called Tobira, giving him that look, the one that conveyed his loneliness at Tobirama's emotional unavailability. It made Tobirama feel guilty enough for him to break eye contact with the Senju heir. He fidgeted, internally, of course, for a bit before nodding once at the idea that was floating at the forefront of his mind. He knew exactly what to do to extinguish that wounded expression from Anija's face. Not swimming, obviously. He was not in the mood to swim in this freezing weather. Alright, Anija, Tobirama grunted, purposely not looking at his brother. I'd rather not waste time doing something unproductive, so we will be dancing rather than swimming. After stiffly saying his bit, had his tone been too harsh? Should he have worded it in another manner? Why was it so difficult for him to express himself in front of others? Tobirama hopped out of his seat, moved towards his weapon rack, and picked his standard training katana. Although he was reluctant to leave his work half done, he was looking forward to trading blows with Anija, as it has been a while since they had last sparred. Perhaps a few hours of exercise would make Hashirama less energetic, while also accomplishing their spending time together quota for this week. When he only saw Hashirama staring at him with wide, startled brown eyes, he fully faced his brother with a condescending look, clearly expressing he was not impressed by the eyeballing. What was up with other people and gawking at him? If it was Hashirama this time who wants to ink him, he would refuse in a heartbeat. The ninja's handwriting and drawings were atrocious. And speaking of inks, should he request for Madara to draw him a design? He was thinking of a red tribal dragon, one that would twine around his body in a manner similar to that of a snake, down to his right ankle. Knowing that this was not the time nor place to think about those deft, slender fingers that trailed deliciously across his heated skin as they drew permanent marks on his body, he shook his head and scowled at his brother. Well? Why are you not leaving to prepare yourself? I may not be your equal in strength and endurance, ninja, but I will take offense if you underestimate me. You should know better than that by now. What? Hashirama looked cluelessly at him, index fingers poking together in a gesture of nervousness. Go to your room. Tobirama spoke slowly as if he were talking to a toddler, and arm yourself for a dance. I will meet you at our training yard in 10 minutes. Kappas. Yes. When Tobirama hears the unsure tilt of Hashirama's tone, he could only let loose a long-suffering sigh. This thing would become the Senju head after Chichiyu succumbs to his illness. Somehow, Tobirama has a feeling that in the future, he would be doing many unethical things to protect his dreamer of an older brother from being eaten alive by the cruel mistress called politics, and Tobirama would gladly do so to spare Hashirama's hands from dirtying. He has been trained from young to undertake all the unpleasant tasks, after all. The clan heir soon-to-be head should not have to handle such despicable affairs. Was that a statement or a question? A statement, of course. Ha 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 ha. Hashirama's mood flipped from nervous to joyous within a split second before he patted Tobirama with enough strength to physically move him from one tatami mat to another. The albino could only watch while holding his stinging back as the older Senju skipped out of his office, looking as if he had just won the lottery. And as Tobirama intimately knows, Hashirama was a sucker when he gambles. Shaking his head to rid himself of the recent memory of Hashirama drunkenly gambling away some of Tobirama's used fundashi, why anyone would ever desire them continues to remain a mystery to the albino. He, with practiced movements, shrugged out of his kinagashi to don his black standard shinobi pants and mesh armor, followed by a short-sleeved blue kimono shirt and hapuri. He debated whether he should clip on his fur collar, but decided against it after a few moments. There was no need to use it in a spar, as the initial purpose was to make his shoulders appear broader than they looked, which would then cause others to think him bulkier, which in turn would make them underestimate his speed, which would also benefit him by. Tobirama forcefully pulled the brakes on his train of thoughts before they could derail into the many advantages of beguiling and misdirecting other people's senses. Sometimes, his brain didn't know what it meant to rest. There was no off button for him to press, always flying from one topic to another. It didn't take him long to reach his destination or to develop a twitch in his left eyebrow. If Tobirama was a lesser man, his chin would be brushing the ground with disbelief. But since he had been trained to be a soldier since before he could even properly walk, he discreetly tried to dispel whatever illusion had befallen onto him. It didn't work. A ninja, his voice was dry as sawdust. Why are you wearing that, and why haven't you prepared your sword? Hashirama only blinked, looking clueless in the face of Tobirama's disapproval. The Senju heir had on an elegant brown kimono with a black obi, held in his right hand was a white fan with pink cherry blossoms drawn on it, and in his other was a shamisen that Tobirama swore he had seen in his cousin Tauka's room before. But how are we supposed to dance without them? That only made Tobirama all the more baffled. What did sparring have anything to do with a shamisen or a fan? Unless one was a ninja from Kei's no Kuni, nobody else in Hai no Kuni uses a fan in a battle. Apart from Madara, of course. Tobirama still remembered the first time he saw Madara wield his gunbai, hilariously out of place in the hands of a 13-year-old, but awed and terrified when the Uchiha actually managed to blow back 3/4 of their forces with just one swing. Till now, he remained clueless about Madara's full repertoire. The Uchiha heir's mastery over fire and wind release was clear for all to see, however, Tobirama had been taught water release by Madara when they had been younger, once upon a time when Tobirama still struggled with ninjutsu in general. It attracted much of Tobirama's curiosity. To be in the presence of someone unbeatably was intoxicating. When he once again noticed that he had been sidetracked, he swiftly returned his attention to Hashirama. No need to get aroused when in the presence of his brother. That would be just wrong on so many levels. Stupid hormones. With our bodies, he deadpanned, what is wrong with you, ninja? Are you feeling unwell? Tobirama. Hashirama suddenly shrieked, tan cheeks alight in red. The loud volume caused the albino to flinch, having not expected that. When I said I wanted to be closer to you, I did not mean it in that way. Little brother, I love you, you know that, right? Tobirama nodded slowly, wary that any sudden movements on his part would trigger Hashirama into attacking him or strangling him with hugs. Why was his brother acting so oddly? More so than usual, that was. You mean the world to me, Tobirama. However, my love for you is purely platonic. Just like Kawurama and Itama. Don't worry, we can work through this, okay? I won't shun you. But we can't do this type of things even in private, Tobirama. I know you're at the age of finding yourself. Finally losing all patience, Tobirama snapped, arms crossed over his chest to hide his confusion. He felt strangely defensive. What on earth are you talking about, Enija? If you don't want to dance, all you are required to do is to simply say so and I'll be on my way. But the sturdy poker face, he hid the sting that exuded from his chest when he said his piece. His brother didn't need to be so cruel by accepting his proposal to spar and then play the fool afterwards, right? Hashirama suddenly froze, his skin returning to its usual shade as his brown eyes narrowed at the way Tobirama was tapping irritably on his training sword sheath. It was a sign of nervousness, Tobirama realizes belatedly, which forces him to immediately still all movements. With how stupid his brother constantly acts, Tobirama oftentimes forgets that there was a brain underneath all that obliviousness. Tobirama, the Senju heir started, voice oddly soft, when you said to dance using only our bodies, what did you mean? This is getting ridiculous, Enija. How else are we supposed to dance if you're holding onto a shamisen and a fan? I do believe that some people are proficient in using them as weapons, but you have never once practiced with either of them. It is dangerous to use them without. Okay. I get it, Hashirama interrupted before he could go on a full tirade about the cons of using unpracticed weapons even during spars. You're referring to spars when you say dance. And bodies as in taijutsu. Oh, for the love of Tobirama. What is with your wordings today? They're twice as confusing. Give me a heart attack, why don't you? Again, what are you talking about? It is only because your brain is dull that my words confuse you so. You clueless idiot, I can't believe my genius of a brother has the emotional capacity of a goldfish and the word phrasing of a toddler, Hashirama facepalmed, looking as if he couldn't believe Tobirama was this dumb. Completely offended, the albino snarled. If anyone is an idiot, it is you, Enija. Explain yourself properly. Truly, this was Madara's insane spiel all over again. Had the two clan heirs both been dropped on their head as infants? Wait here for me while I go and get changed, little brother. We can spar then. Before Tobirama has any chance to react, Hashirama had already run off, leaving a trail of dust clouds in his wake. Pinching the bridge of his nose, he let loose a frustrated exhale. While Tobirama was weighing the pros and cons of simply ditching Hashirama in order to attend to his duties, Itama came running over, his cheeks flushed red as he panted with exertion. Is something wrong? Tobirama stoically asked even as his eyes had already begun their examination, searching his baby brother's body for injuries and the likes. He paused slightly when he notices a purplish rhombus in the middle of Itama's sweaty forehead, previously hidden by his bangs, but now seen due to how clammy his windswept hair was, before moving on with his observations. It wasn't a concern of his if Itama and Madara had matching face tattoos from who knows when. Really. He wasn't feeling betrayed or jealous at all. Honest. It's Chichiyu. He's deteriorating rapidly. Itama announced seriously. Report this to Enija. I will go ahead. Without waiting for Itama to respond, Tobirama sped off in the direction of his father's bedroom. Tobirama's narrow red eyes were dark and in his mind, all there currently were plans being calculated and discarded at a speed that those with average IQ could never keep up with. Madara would be glad. Perhaps this news would improve his mood, he ended up muttering under his breath, his lips unconsciously curled into a small smile. Madara was ecstatic. The news of Senju Bitsuma's death could not have come at a better time. Without further ado, he sent word, via one of his hawk Turyu, since only the main house lacked servants, for Hikari to make an appearance in front of him. Balsti relaxedly stood in the middle of the small balcony connected to his private office, basking in the warmth of the afternoon sun. He caresses Topo's breast feathers. His onyx eyes were gentle when he gazed at the docile red-tailed albino hawk perched majestically on his gloved dorsum. A hastily written note was currently on top of his desk, next to the many piled scrolls and untouched paperwork. Madara smirked, it had been a good decision on his part to train homing pigeons in secret. That was not all he had done in the shadows, however. Another scheme of his that has not seen the light of day was his personal brainwashed moles. The benefits of having loyal undercover agents working as servants for other shinobi clans had been something Madara had implemented as soon as his chakra reserves were big enough for him to impart his will onto gullible civilians via genjutsu and seals. Whenever he was out on missions, he would constantly seek out street rats, the younger the better, to use as sleeper agents, causing coincidental and tragic encounters to pull at one's heartstrings. Shinobi may have been trained to be hired killers and soldiers of war, but ultimately, unlike Madara who perceive others to be pawns on his chessboard, they were still human and would take pity on the starving civilian orphans struggling to survive out on the streets. It's funny how my plans all come together so easily in this life, he whispered in satisfaction, his lips brushing softly against Topo's white wings. When he heard a meek and feminine voice outside his shoji doors, Madara called for his expected guest to enter, whilst also turning to face her. Hikari did so with her head bowed low and her body language radiating unease. He had predicted such a reaction, hence he only gazed at her with frosty eyes. The reason for her fearful behavior and his blunt disdain was not unfounded. She had, after all, done him a great disservice by breaking their contract. One that they had mutually agreed on. To cohabitate as housemates rather than spouses. In fact, she should be groveling at his magnanimity when he decided to spare her life. If he had not experienced so many hardships and lived through so many wars brought by vengeance, her continuous survival in Madara's household could not be assured after that vile wrongdoing. That incident had happened 2 months ago, and the result was apparent. After that, she has wisely limited all interactions with him and his brothers as much as possible. However, as a sensor second only to Senju Tobirama, the subtle formation of tiny chakra networks around her abdominal region was too obvious. Madara-sa, who gave you the permission to call me by my name? Or rather, who gave you permission to speak at all? Madara's pair of onyx eyes flashed crimson, the veins of his forehead throbbing in pure fury when the memory of that night appeared suddenly in his mind. The vivid evocation of his name being whispered over and over again by her was disgusting. It made him gnash his teeth in anger. When Hikari saw his darkening expression, she flinched and hunched her shoulders to appear as pitiful and small as possible. It took a painfully long time for Madara to compartmentalize and calm down, but after he did, he allowed for his lips to curve into a slight yet cruel smile. The day was a good day, and it shan't be spoilt by the likes of her. Thanks to one of his pigeons' swift delivery, by the end of this week, Tajima would be buried 6 feet under, and Madara would officially be crowned the clan head. He could not help but allow a faint giggle to slip past his lips, the madness and excitement in his eyes hard to contain. Finally, he could shrug off all the restrictive chains and act accordingly. With his chin tipped upwards, he looked down his nose at Hikari, as if she was something less than human. Tobo too gave her a piercing stare, looking away not a minute later, as if he had deemed her unworthy of any attention. Although Madara wanted so badly to be rid of her, the life in her womb stopped him from doing anything rash. She still has her uses despite the disgusting feeling he gets whenever he sees her. He only needed to wait another 7 months before he could throw her to his beloved raptors to feast upon. Besides, he had already placed a seal at the back of her tongue, disallowing her from talking to anyone about her daily activities here in Madara's household. Before Madara could kindly inform her about the acts she would be compelled into maneuvering, the shoji door leading into his office slid open. Izuna came strutting inside as if he owned the place, which only made Madara sigh indulgently, the insanity in his eyes hidden behind the shadow of his fringe. "Tadema, Aniki." Izuna grinned from ear to ear, "Did you miss me?" Izuna completely ignored the blood splatters on his person and lunged at Madara for a hug. The Uchiha heir didn't bother to dodge, only resigning himself to be covered in the blood of his brother's victims. Tobo squawked indignantly when he was knocked into the air, flying out the window after giving Izuna a few angry pecks. "Ocarina-sai, Izuna. You know very well that I constantly ache to acquaint you with our newly dug koi pond. Aniki is always so mean to me. What do Ryota, Taku, and Yaku have that I don't?" "Cuteness," Madara deadpanned, voice slightly muffled against Izuna's shoulder. Izuna puffed out his cheeks in mock anger, "Excuse you. I am, and forever will be, cute. Just keep saying that, Izu. Who knows, maybe one day, it'll come true." Madara chuckled whilst fondly patting his little brother's back. "Anyway, are you hurt anywhere? Do my feelings count?" "No. Demon. Your compliment makes me blush." At Izuna's speechless face, Madara smirked. Teasing Izuna has always brought him much entertainment. However, they should not get sidetracked. "So, did something happen for you to come back early?" Madara worriedly cupped his younger brother's blood-stained cheeks, staring straight into a pair of similar onyx eyes. Tajima had given Izuna a full week to complete a bandit extermination mission just outside the Uchiha territory. But it has only been 3 days since his departure. This could only mean that Izuna has completed his assignment and intentionally returned early, which was something Izuna would never do in a million years. The younger Uchiha prefers to play around the red light districts until the very last minute, only returning when due. "Oh, ye of little faith," Izuna pouted for a couple of seconds before abruptly turning serious. "The information supplied to us was inaccurate. We'll need to launch an investigation on the client. If I had not been bored and pushed for the mission, Tatsumaki, who Otu-san has selected beforehand, would not have survived this." Madara gave his brother's cheeks one last caress before he walked behind his desk and sat down. "Elaborate," he demanded whilst he rested his elbows atop his mahogany desk and his chin on his intertwined fingers. Izuna instinctually straightened his posture, completely ignoring Hikari, who was now standing awkwardly near the doors, not daring to leave, yet at the same time not daring to ask for permission to leave. Judging by the way the bandits moved, I suspect that they had been trained formally in the shinobi arts. Or rather, I do not believe that they are actually bandits. Perhaps a minor clan hired to act like bandits. I've captured the presumed leader and handed him to Hikaku for further interrogation. Since you have fought him in battle, you should roughly know his personality. How soon do you reckon he will break? He's stubborn, that's for sure. However, he is not fully trained to guard against Jinjutsu. I believe that Hikaku would be able to crack his head open after a few days. HN. I suspect that is not all. Aniki is right, Izuna gave a wry smile, the estimated strength of the enemies was also wrong, there were at least 3 times the numbers stated. The reason why I am able to come out partially unscathed was due to my training under you, Aniki. For those of Tatsumaki's level, it would have been suicide. Other than myself, who else have you told about this? Nobody. I had a feeling you would not like it if I reported this matter to Otu-san or his aide. Good instincts. I've indeed raised you well, Madara leaned back against his seat with narrowed eyes, I smell an infestation of pests in our backyard. The upper echelons. Perhaps. My gut, however, tells me that their servants' quarters would have more of a stench. Why though? I don't understand the connection all that effort used to insert themselves into our midst, screw up our intel just to get our eyes. It'll be easier to just sneak in, gouge out a few pairs of eyes, and sneak out in the middle of the night. No, at Izuna's confused expression, Madara elaborated, not entirely. You might not know this since you have never encountered veteran hunters before, but in my experience, seasoned ninjutsu thieves would often not work in a 4-man cell when their aim is a singular Uchiha party. They would also have a medic nin specialized in enucleation with them. The Sharingan is useless if not activated, hence their aim is to give us a killing blow at the right moment. Since nobody but Tobirama and then Hashirama noticed that the Uchiha clan were far more emotional than they portray themselves to be. It would be a major clusterfuck if their enemies discover that the Sharingan could be triggered by intense emotional distress. Since it is also useless to implant a deactivated Sharingan into the sockets of a non-Uchiha, as they do not have the right cranial nerves to control our eyes. Hence my point. The more manpower they have, the more likely it is that they are prepared to abduct someone alive and in generally good health despite their own casualties. Quantity over quality for hunters could only mean one thing. Izuna immediately went pale at the insinuation. Bloodline thieves, the younger Uchiha whispered hoarsely. Nothing was worse than being forced to become another clan's breeding horse. It would be a far kinder fate for an Uchiha to have their eyes gouged after death than to remain alive and have their children be raised as disposable fodder against their own kin, unless that particular Uchiha was defective like Tajima. Indeed. If this hypothesis of mine is all true, I fear that who was it again? Tatsumaki. Yes, I fear that Fubuki. It's Tatsumaki. Is not the only one who has been targeted. This is not a good thing, Izuna. I'll need Ryota to replace Hikaku and be sure to inform him that I expect fruitful results in an hour's time. Izuna furrowed his brow, does that mean you'll authorize the use of those approaches? I trust Ryota to know the limits, even if he has to get a little rough, Madara says sternly. But if others know about Ryota's involvement or the methods he uses. Madara understood Izuna's hesitancy. Although Madara phrased it in such a nice way, in their violent world, a little rough would be interpreted as do whatever it takes, as long as the prisoner remains alive. For those who have a weak heart, it would be career suicide to assign them such a task. As for why Madara gave this interrogation to Ryota, unlike how motherly and duteous his second younger brother was, inwardly, he was an extreme sadist. After having learned of Ryota's interest in all matters regarding T&I, Madara had taught him all that he knew about extracting intel from a person. Be they by physical or mental means. And because Ryota, as soon as he was assigned to the intel unit, would have his head full of confidential info, Madara was obliged to train him in counter-interrogation and escape techniques as well. Some of their clansmen in that unit had paled and barfed all over themselves when they coincidentally stumbled upon Madara dishing out those techniques to Ryota. Madara's training, as usual, was not for the weak of heart, whilst being mentally strong was a quality that all shinobi required to function properly. Torture was something many would blanch at, no matter how safe the training environment was. Although Madara was protective of his family, he would not overstep the line and cross into the territory of smothering them. After all, too much love could weaken them. The only way to survive in this harsh era was to guide his little brothers when they are young and push them down the cliff as soon as he deemed them ready to survive the fall. With an exhausted sigh, Madara rubbed his aching temples. I am not fond of repeating myself, Izuna. The aftermath won't be pretty if you approve this. With all due respect, I ask that you reconsider, Aniki. Think about your reputation as the clan heir. You're already being called a faulty Uchiha. That was true. But did Madara have time to concern himself about his reputation when lives were currently at risk? There had already been 3 key reports this month, their bodies not found due to one reason or another. Therein lies the problem. 1 report may be excused. 2 reports in a short time frame may be due to bad luck. 3 reports, however, was a conspiracy. Fubuki may very well have been a fourth victim if Izuna had not stepped in. What if all those 3 reported clansmen had been captured and detained without Tajima and his lackeys know so? Madara was frustrated and wishes he could send out a few squads to investigate those deaths ASAP. But first and foremost, he needed to flush out the infestation of rats in his home prior to doing anything that could cause a leak. Who, other than Izuna, could he trust to send out to investigate this matter? That was the main question, as one mistake could throw everything into disarray. Reputation. He chuckled without humor, his Sharingan flashing for a microsecond. Why should I give 2 shites about a reputation that has already been dragged through the mud? DSK, Izuna clicked his tongue, clearly displeased. It's because you refuse to correct their assumptions and misunderstandings. Are you going to keep quiet again? Just like how you turn a blind eye when the intel unit began spreading stupid shit, like how you constantly mistreat Ryota. That's fucking ridiculous. Do they not have eyes? You were only training high. Focus, Izuna. Don't get sidetracked. Is there anything else to report? Madara purposefully looked away, busying his hands with folding the note his pigeon had delivered. His younger brother pursed his lips into a thin line, but ultimately shook his head in negative. No. Should I investigate the client? Leave that to Hikaku. Before you go, I'll trouble you with burning this for me. Madara passes the note to Izuna, who stored it inside his sleeves without looking. Understood. I'll be taking my leave now, sir. Good work, soldier. Before Izuna could take another step, Madara licked the bottom of his lips and spoke in a tentative manner, not at all eager for them to part on such tense terms. Aizu. I've been craving for an Arazushi lately. The younger Uchiha froze. It took a few tense seconds before he responded, a wide grin on his face and his professional shinobi mask nowhere to be found. Then we should pick a date for the 5 of us to have a picnic. It's been a while since we've gone on a family outing. I'll be sure to bring the ingredients required for Ryota to cook your favorite food, Aniki. Done. I appreciate all your effort, Ataudo. The second Izuna closed the shoji door behind of him, Madara's eyes were instantly upon Hikari, the gentleness that had been there when speaking with Izuna now replaced by frost. When she notices his attention, she immediately bowed her head, a layer of cold sweat appearing on her forehead. Now then, this is what you are going to do for me, my dear and loyal wife. Hikari shuddered, her entire body shaking like a leaf as she stared straight into those abyss-like eyes. Uchiha Hikari felt both pleased and nervous when the name of her marriage partner was revealed last night by her honorable grandfather, Uchiha Akio, one of the 5 respected Uchiha elders. Although she has been raised from young with the anticipation of being their clan heir's wife, the promise of Tajima-sama's words made it real. It was, without a doubt, an honor to marry him. Madara-sama was their clan's strongest warrior. And despite being 2 years younger than him, she believes that with her wifely devotion and etiquette training, she would be able to act like a proper lady and not let him down. Her immediate family members, too, were all joyful to hear that Hikari would be marrying into the main house, but there still lies a worry at the forefront of their minds due to the many rumors circulating about Madara-sama. Bad ones. For example, one of the many revolting rumors was that he did not have any emotions and would not hesitate to kill his own brothers if they so much as look at him wrong. However, Akio Jaya-sama has assured them repeatedly that although Madara-sama was a distant and frigid man, he was still, at the base, an Uchiha, and by default, an Uchiha was loyal to their family and loved ones. In order for their Sharingan to evolve, they have to feel intense emotions, most of which were likely to be love. She was surprised to hear from her honorable grandfather that Madara-sama even has the Sharingan, as many of her fellow clansmen believe that he was one of those defective unawakened ones. Hence, Akio Jaya-sama emphasized that Hikari should not believe in any of those rumors that denounced Madara-sama's reputation, voices that called him faulty. An emotionless Uchiha could never grow to be that powerful. And while many whisper about Madara-sama only having homosexual urges, Hikari doubted that, surely, they were simply jealous of Madara-sama's talents and pure ancestry. Madara-sama was a warrior, never one to sit still and always departing for missions and war, never having much time for debauchery. Thus, Hikari believes that Madara-sama was simply inexperienced in the areas of pleasure, rather than ill in the head. No sane man would ever love his own gender. That was simply disgusting and unnatural. Furthermore, Akio Jaya-sama told her repeatedly that Madara-sama has never once disobeyed the orders of the clan elders and had the perfect weapon to harness against those wretched senju. And Hikari held high respects for Madara-sama, who sacrificed so much for their clan. Remember your training, Hikari, her mother suddenly said as she continues to comb through Hikari's long, beautiful hair. You will be Madara-sama's beautiful bride. Be sure to fulfill your womanly duties and serve him to your best abilities. Bring pride to our family. You must give birth to many of his sons, Hikari. I won't disappoint you nor Akio Jaya-sama, hahu. Mother and daughter both smiled pleasantly at each other, both in their own imaginary world where Madara-sama was clan head and Hikari's son their clan's treasured heir. The child born from Madara-sama and Hikari would no doubt be beautiful, regal, and strong. That, she has no doubt. The week flew by in the speed of light. Preparations were perfected as the women cleaned and decorated for the much-anticipated wedding between their clan's heir and one of the honorable elder's granddaughters, also known as one of their clan's top beauty. Hikari was not shy to call herself a beauty, even in her own mind, as that was a fact. Hikari sat still on the zabuton as her mother did her bridal makeup and hair, her gaze never once wavering from the mirror that showed a reflection of a regal lady in a beautiful and elegant shiramuku. All 5 of her siblings, on the other hand, were excitedly chattering around the duo. Their conversation varies, but it was mostly about the members of the main house. Thanks to Hikari, they would all be in-laws, and that meant that they could get to know Madara-sama's younger brothers more intimately. The marriage would also elevate their family's hierarchy within the clan, making them second only to the main house. Hikari-sama. You'll have to invite us into your home whenever possible. Hitomi, their family's second eldest daughter, gushed in an infatuated manner. To have a close-up view of Izuna-sama, that will be a dream come true. Indeed. Hikari secretly agreed that Izuna-sama was one of the most handsome people in their clan. Not needing to mention how super friendly he was, frequently chatting with the civilians even as he made his almsgiving rounds. She and the other unwedded girls would often look at him with gazes full of longing. What are you talking about, Ni-san? Just a close-up view. Aim higher and have a conversation with him. You might never know if you'll pique his interest. Hiro, their family's eldest son and a shinobi, wiggled his eyebrows in a lecherous manner. Her siblings all laughed when Hitomi imitated a tomato, stuttering denials as she shyly covered her face with her hands. Before any of them could tease Hitomi further, there was a pleasant voice calling from outside Hikari's shoji doors, requesting to enter. Her mother checked Hikari's makeup and hair one last time before granting permission. The person, who they all assumed to be a servant, softly slid open the door and walked into the room with a grace that exhibits his shinobi training. Everyone was shocked to see that it was Ryota-sama who came, doing the duties of a lowly servant rather than that of a respected shinobi. Or rather, it was generally shocking to see the 15-year-old at all, since Ryota-sama was rarely seen outside the main residence or the intel unit building, too busy with his duties to mingle with the community. Hikari was older than Ryota-sama by a year, but despite his younger age, she could appreciate his graceful features. Truly, all of the main house members were beautiful in their own way. She was looking forward to seeing how Madara-sama turned out to be, as nobody could actually tell her what he looks like, except for his wild, untamed hair. I apologize for letting Ryota-sama inconvenience himself by coming all the way here. Her mother was the one who recovered first and reacted. Snapping back from their daze, all of them were quick to follow her example and bowed to show their respect to him. Ryota-sama smiled sweetly while waving off the apology. Please, raise your heads. Hikari-san will soon become Madara-oni's wife and us family by marriage. Why yes, Ryota-sama. It is as you say. May I know if you will be the one who escorts her to the venue? Hikari-san is a very important individual right now. This is the least I can do, no. It should have been Izuna-sama in my place, but unfortunately, he is currently in charge of security. Hikari, along with her family, relaxed at his words. True enough, they should have realized that a mere servant could never represent the status of the main house. This wedding was an important one for their entire clan. The risk of an assassin pretending to be a servant was high. Hence, for the main house to send someone of Ryota-sama's caliber as her escort/bodyguard was a huge favor to their family. This could also be seen that the main house approved of the bride, which meant that Hikari was now something like the Uchiha clan's princess, someone meant to be protected and showered with love. It made her want to puff her chest out in pride, but she held herself back. After all, it would not do to show anything but modesty when in front of someone that was of a higher rank than her, for now. Thank you for your kindness and time, Ryota-sama. Hikari returned his smile and stepped closer to the younger Uchiha. Do we leave now? Yes. When she turned to address her family, she missed the frost that flashed through Ryota's pair of bottomless onyx eyes, the eyes of a T&I officer who had seen something he disliked. If someone were to see this cruel and sadistic personality of his, they would no doubt run for the hills. Thankfully on her part, when she turned to face him, he was already back to his cute and friendly self. As soon as they arrived at the shrine, her eyes immediately landed on the groom, standing loftily at the front in his dashing Mitsuki. Madara-sama, for once, has his mane tied into a high ponytail. The hairstyle forced him to reveal his handsome and sharp features, was the rhombus on his forehead, a temporary wedding decoration of some kind. Which only made Hikari's heart further quicken, her cheeks no doubt red from shyness. To have the honor of marrying someone with such gorgeous features, the women of their clan would no doubt envy her once they laid their eyes on Madara-sama at the reception later on, as the ritual and vows were for immediate family only. Although Hikari wanted to quickly stand next to her groom, she forcefully held herself back and strode elegantly towards Madara-sama. Finally, her dream of marrying into the main house was coming true, although deep in her heart, she had kinda hoped that she could be married to Izuna, the Uchiha clan's heartthrob and most desirable bachelor. The time has come for them to celebrate their first night together. Hikari was nervously anticipating the arrival of her newly wedded husband. She was currently inside Madara-sama's bedroom, in Seiza and on his, their, futon, facing the shoji doors with a tempting curl of her lips. She waited patiently for him, the time ticking away until it reached an hour, which soon turned into 2, which then became 3. Midnight had long passed, yet there was still no sign of Madara-sama. Hikari has long lost her smile, her posture slack as she bit her bottom lip anxiously, thinking of all the gossip it would garner if they did not consummate on the first night of their marriage. Just as she decided to make a move to search for her missing husband, the shoji door slid open, revealing Madara-sama who was still in his ceremonial attire. She was quick to smile at him, albeit slightly strained. Madara-sama, she executed a perfect Saikure for 3 seconds, bowing at a 45 degrees angle from her Seiza position, the tips of her fingers placed delicately on the floor in front of her knees with her thumbs touching. This wife greets her husband. Before she could even begin her flattery, Madara-sama held up a hand to stop her. She tilted her head in confusion but obeyed nonetheless. "I've kept you waiting." Hikari couldn't help the shiver of anticipation from showing when she heard Madara's slightly husky baritone. His voice was extremely pleasant to the ear, rich and almost seductive, even. "And not at all, Madara-sama," she bowed her head while at the same time peeking at him shyly. "I know you have many important matters lined up in your tight schedule. I should be the one thanking you for taking the time to come and greet me. I value those who understand." Suddenly, Hikari's cheeks flushed with color. The reason was due to Madara-sama's barely there smile. She so badly wanted to fidget in place, as her womanhood was no doubt soaked from the sex appeal Madara-sama was oozing. "I thank you for your praise," Hikari responded in a subservient manner. When he took a step inside and slid close the shoji door, she didn't care to conceal the way her eyes were focused solely on him. She waited with bated breath as he shrugged off his attire, layer by layer, until he was only in his fundashi. Hikari hungrily devoured him with her eyes. She gazes intently at his sinewy arms, long legs, and a delicious six-pack on his abdomen. His body was all firm and tight with muscles, and not an ounce of fat could be seen. That was, no doubt, the body of a veteran shinobi. The proof of his strength came from the lack of visible scars, almost non-existent on his milky white skin. Unexpectedly, Madara-sama's body was also riddled in various inked patterns and designs. In her opinion, the tattoos only enhanced his natural beauty. They tempted her to lick and nibble and savor all of him. Just as she slipped a portion of her kimono off her slim shoulders, teasingly revealing a portion of her alluring skin, Madara-sama turned away to open his wardrobe. He then slipped into a pair of shinobi pants and high-collared mantle, an attire worn when an Uchiha warrior was prepared to go on a mission or leave the compound. Is Madara-sama leaving for a mission? She rushed to question him, unwilling to conceal the disheartened expression on her face. Hopefully, he could hear the dismay in her tone and change his mind. "HN," was all Madara-sama said before he jumped out the window and left without looking back. Hikari's shoulders slumped in disappointment. But she suddenly clenched her fists, her eyes filled with determination. I would not be discouraged that easily. With her gorgeous looks and alluring curves, which man could ever deny her? She would get him to eat out of her palms by the end of this month. 2 months after their marriage. "Will you be available tonight, Madara-sama? I have a meeting with the war council. Don't wait up for me. Your wife understands." 4 months after their marriage. "Please allow me to assist you in cleaning up, Madara-sama. HN. May I ask how your mission went?" "Well. Then tonight, I am too tired." "I understand. Rest well." 6 months after their marriage. "Should I disrobe myself or would you prefer to be the one to do so, Madara-sama?" "I do not mind either way. Keep them on. The twins will be arriving soon." "Oh." 8 months after their marriage. "Madara-sama. After dinner, I'll be with Ryota. He needs help with his calligraphy." "Understood." 10 months after their marriage. "Izuna-sama. I apologize for interrupting your lunch, but do you perchance know where Madara-sama is?" "Aniki?" "Sorry, Hikari-san.